Hello, folks. Good evening. Come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to have everybody as always. Say hello in the comments so I know you're on. Hello, Keith Vincent. Good to have you, sir. As always, I hope you're well. Hello, Aunt Florence, Penny Peaton. I hope you are doing great. Hello, Donna and Lisa. Harvey is out in Peterborough. Good to have you. Hello, James Lander. Great to have you on. As always, hope you're doing really, really well. Tara is out in Whitecourt, Alberta. I've been to Whitecourt, at least drove through it. Dave and Kirsty are on. Great to have you, my friends. Lorna is on. Mark is on out in Gander. Les and Marg are in Prince Edward Island. Dulcie is on. Dave Carlos from the sunny Niagara region. Well, Dave, we haven't seen the sun here very much, I'm afraid, where I am. I think it's been rain and drizzle or chance of rain every day since the snow went. Yes, Denzel's early. Thought he'd try to get a front seat. Yes, sir, you have excellent seating here. And happily on this show, the seats are all the same price. So you get what you pay for. Let's see. Jenny is on. She's excited. I'm glad. Hello, Beulah and Alvin and Joel. Good to have you on. Let me see. This is skipping real fast here this evening. Okay, Kathy and Glenda and Pauline and Carol and Elwyn is on here in Springdale. Hello, Patty St. George. Great to have you on, my friend. Hello, Beverly and Eileen. Hello, Glenn. Good to have you on. And Audrey and Peggy. And Dwight is locked down in Waterloo. Yeah, hard times, Dwight. Hello, Justin. Good to have you on, my friend. Harry and Betty are on in Burntbury. Carolyn is on. Tanya. Denise is on from Gander. Andrew Saunders is on in Clarenville with his wife. Sharon is on in Kings Point. Sian and Justin Heath from the Benson residence. I'm so glad you could join us. I'll chat to you a bit more in a moment. Hello, Sherry and Levine. Ryan are in Gander. Hi, Ruth. Algon and Oliver on. Hello, Golda. I hope you're doing really, really well. Lynn is on and Lloyd. Muriel is on and Bay Roberts. Deidre is on. Hello, and Mrs. Deidre Holm. Ruth is on and Marilyn. Sharon is on in Gander, Maryland. Tony Roberts is on. Good to have you, as always. Dana Han. Gloria is on. Lonnie is on. And Patsy. Mike Francis, looking sharp, Mike. As Pastor Hardy Perry used to say, that's never been my problem. Every now and then I'd see Pastor Perry and I'd say, but Pastor Perry, you're looking great. And he'd say, that's never been my problem. Always can learn from Hardy Perry. Hello to my dear mother. Hello, Jamie Warren, Bishop of Marystown. Good to have you on. Folks, you're coming in faster than I can keep up with here. Hello, Joy and Debbie is in Gander. Steve Jenkins. Good to have you on, my friend. Hope you and Stephanie are well. Paul Simpson. Hello, Maxine in Grand Falls. Roddy says it's 20 and sunny at the campground. Yeah, we're hoping for 20 and sunny by Canada Day. Melissa Sutobin is on. Anne and Larry are in PEI. Gloria is in Mount Pearl. Hello, Alfreda and Tammy and Hazel and Willie Breton. Looking forward to their young son, perhaps. Raymond and Patricia on. Judy and Paul, good evening to you. Hello, Elaine and Tammy. Roberta and Keith rubbing in also that it is 23 and sunny in Ontario. Roy is on. Roberta Ball is on. Good to have you. Hello, Wayne and Hilda and Ruth and Nina and David and Ruth King from Okotoks. I've been out there too. At one point, we lived in Calgary for a couple of years. Hello, Linda. Sean Weir. Good evening, Mr. Sean Weir. Please try to straighten out Pat St. George for me. I don't think that can be done, Sean. There's been a lot of effort put into that over the years, but it's not looking hopeful. Hello, Keith, Roy, Kathy, Ina. Good to have you on. And Sheldon. Hello, Sid. Good to have you and Loretta. Hello, Jordan Harnham. Always good to have you join us, my friend. Hillary and Andrew, always there with Deidre. That's good. Barbara and Sean, Enid, hello, Lily. Hope you and Rick are doing real well. Aldina and Cindy also rubbing in the lovely weather they have in Toronto. And you need lovely weather, I guess, because you're locked down. And it's nice at least to sit on the deck. Hello, Julia and Matthew. Thank you, Jennifer. Good to have you on as well. Heather's in the Chamberlains. Tony Curtis is in Thompson. Hello, Daniel Saunders from down the road. Hello, Melanie Nickel. Hello, Denise. Pelly. Amy's in Spaniards Bay. Amy, I hope you're doing real good. Hello, Betty Lou. Helen is in Lewisport. Jeff and Juaniso. Jeff, I hope you're doing great, my friend. Be nice to get a ride on the old bike there one of these days. Hello, Melanie in Port Saunders. Erica is watching from the van. Erica and Cody were just out for a date and had some real nice steaks. And they thought of me enough that they sent me a picture of their supper and also of their dessert, because we have shared many of these over the years, the four of us, when Melinda's been in Toronto. Hello, Ruth and Glenn. Kristen is on. Good to have you, Kristen. Hello, Kathy and Rob Higgs. Good to have you on. Julia is in Lab City where it's 9 degrees. I'm not even sure it's 9 degrees here now, to be honest with you. So keep coming in, folks. Always great to have you on. I got almost 300 on now, so that's lovely indeed. Let me give you a sense here of where we are going. This is where we're going tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit off the top about my dear friend Ralph Benson. And then I'm going to move into a discussion with Dr. Brian Stiller, who I'll introduce in a minute, on what's going on in Canada these days. And we'll conclude this show tonight with a discussion with Barry Dean Breton on bringing a dream into reality. We're going to talk about the story of YC. And that'll be fun. Be fun for me, and I hope for you as well. So that is where we are headed. Hello, Joan, Greg, and Crystal. Always good to have you on, my friends. Eileen, the Jelly Belly has been replenished. Hallelujah. Yes, it is good times indeed. Ralph and Louise are in Brampton. Eugene and Dorothy Rowe in Thorburn Lake. Hello, Stephen Adams and Nina Saunders in Springdale. Peter and Dolores are on. Art and Edna Payne are also on. By way of announcements, next week is Victoria Day weekend, and I will not be doing a live show. I'm going to have the weekend with my bride, and so there'll be no show next week. I hope you all enjoy Canada Day. And for those of you who are history buffs, this is, make this a little bigger for you, the 1696th birthday of the opening of the Council of Nicaea. And you've heard me talk before about Christendom and the Emperor Constantine and the joining of church and state. Well, that's been going on since Constantine's conversion in 313. In 325, he called the bishops of the church together, and they had the Council of Nicaea, at which time they really hammered out what they believed about Jesus. How could one God, the one God of Israel, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, how could he be made manifest in Jesus Christ? Because Jesus claimed to be God. And they worked on that for several hundred years. And I thought I would start tonight by reading in your hearing the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. And we believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us and for our salvation he came down from heaven. By the power of the Holy Spirit, he became incarnate from the Virgin Mary and was made man. For our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. And on the third day, he rose again in accordance with the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God, and he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. And we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father. And with the Father and Son, he is worshipped and glorified. He has spoken through the prophets. And we believe in one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. Catholic there means universal. And we acknowledge one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, and we look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. And sometimes folks ask me, in all of this study you do, all of the reading you do, all of the topics you cover, how do you, what do you lean on? How do you stay grounded? And one of the things I stay grounded in is the creeds. So this is the earliest statement of what the church really believed outside of the scriptures as they flesh out who Jesus was. And you can see a large part of the Nicene Creed there is dedicated to Jesus and who Jesus was. And there's a lot of language in there for that. So that's 1696 years ago on the 20th of May that the Nicene Creed started. So just a little tidbit for that for you. Keep coming in, folks. Good to have any number of you on. Let me see who else is new here. Art and Edna and Barbara and Ryan Ball. Good to have you on, my buddy. And the rideouts in Nova Scotia and Claudette up in Newmarket, and Edna and Wayne and Mark and Heather and Jason Rousel, Orm Clark and Nathan Freak. It's good to have all of you folks on. If you know somebody interested in this type of thing, you can certainly feel free to invite them as well. Shifting gears here now, I want to, off the top, speak a little bit about my good friend Ralph. And as many, I imagine, of you will know, Pastor Ralph Benson was tragically killed last week and is now in the presence of the God he loved and served. And I attended his really celebration of life on Friday. And I have to tell you that I've told a number of people that it was one of the most profoundly Christian funerals, but better a celebration, that I have ever attended, really. And the theme of resurrection and the theme of the fact that the gospel has overcome the power of the sting and power of death over us just permeated the entire service. We worshiped together, we celebrated together, and yes, of course, we mourned together, because we are in a period of profound sadness. The loss is tremendous. It's being felt provincially. I can't think of another religious figure in my lifetime that's been mourned so provincially as Ralph Benson. It's really been incredible to see the outpouring from all parts of the province. And no doubt that's because he spent many, many years in ministry, but also through Heart Matters, of course, the program that airs on NTV. He always did his to the point. And I got to say, Ralph, in 3 minutes or so, always fit in a powerful message, which, as you may know, is no small feat for a preacher to fit in any kind of message in 3 minutes. I can hardly clear my throat and have a drink of water in 3 minutes. So, yeah, so you had this great provincial outpouring. And I was, as I was sitting there Friday and then visiting with the family after, and I'm hoping tonight, Paulette, you're watching, we love you. And it was so good to see you on Friday. And Justin Cian, Mike and Jenny, and the rideouts, and the Snows, Mike, good to see you as well. And, our hearts are with you. And we loved Ralph like you did. And a couple of things about Ralph I wanted to say. Ralph was really a servant who loved people. And this came out over and over again in the tributes, came out over and over again in the service. Ralph really, really loved people, and he loved to, give me 1 second here. He really loved to serve them. And give me a little second here. I got a bit of technological challenges. Here we go. Over and over and over again in the tributes and stuff, it was all about his heart, and it actually became the theme really for that whole assembly in Gander, a heart for people. And boy, to know Ralph Benson was to know that he absolutely had a heart for people. It's all he talked about when you were with him. I mean, Ralph loved people and talked about people and loved to be with people. And when I think of him, I think of him as a servant who loved people. But he was also a leader. And I had opportunity to sit with Ralph on a number of committees when we'd be doing business. And, you know, Ralph had a way of leading. He for all he was, and this was what was fascinating about him, and I haven't got time to tell all the stories here tonight, but for all he was so warm and gentle and loving, you know, to people he saw, and so pleasant. I saw him lead, and I saw him speak so clearly at times, and so with so much forthrightness. He could be so direct when he needed to be, to say a point or to share something. It was really, really inspiring to watch him so balance so well the idea of being warm and approachable and tender-hearted, but yet being able to speak plainly and forthrightly when he needed to. And he was a real model for me in that, I have to say. Ralph was also a visionary. If you've ever driven by the property in Gander, that wonderful building that you have, you know that in large part, that's there because of Ralph's vision. And he dreamed of a place that would serve the community. And it's been said, you know, that he went to the town and he went to other organizations and said, if we, the church, built a building, how could we do it? What could we do that would better serve you? And boy, that vision was right through everything Ralph did. How can we serve you? And he dreamed about that. And I spent some time with Ralph on and off, not certainly as much as some of you watching, but I spent some time with Ralph during the process of trying to get that building from a dream into a reality. And you need to know it was tough. There are things about bringing dreams into reality that are really tough. And boy, he found it tough at times, and we would talk about that. But he persevered. And in the saddest of all ironies, you know, my topic later on tonight is bringing a dream into reality. And he is one of the people I thought of to join Dean on the screen later on to talk about how you bring a dream into reality, because he actually did it. And Ralph was a visionary. He was a servant. He was a very plain-spoken leader. And he was a visionary. But Ralph was also, to me, a friend. And he really encouraged me. And he celebrated my wins. Ralph, I always felt Ralph was in my corner. Now, some of you would know this, some of you wouldn't, but, you know, in my denomination, and because of the way I think and the way I teach and some of the things I believe and how I approach stuff, not everybody has been a fan of mine, which I'm sure comes as a tremendous shock. I hope you're seated for that revelation. And certainly not all the pastors. I spoke at our conferences for quite a while before some people warmed up even slightly, and some of them still have not thought out much more than ice cubes. But Ralph seemed to understand what I was trying to do. I have no idea if he always agreed with me. I doubt he did. But he really encouraged me. He was a friend to me, and was just always always in my corner. Just one of those people you knew was in your corner. And but I did want to say this. Ralph at times got on my nerves too, because no tribute is complete without honesty, and Ralph would be very honest, and he would like this. And let me tell you how Ralph got on my nerves. Ralph was so stinking positive all the time and so enthusiastic that it would get on my nerves at times, you see, because we would be talking about these challenges we'd have, and he'd have his set of challenges and I'd have my set of challenges. And Ralph would say, yeah, but it's getting better. It's getting better. God is moving. We're gonna see this. And I'd say, Ralph, it's not getting better. Stop it. No, it's not. You're getting no, Ralph. He'd say, yes, God is. And then he'd say, as was referenced Friday, but God is sovereign. And I'd say, well, if he's sovereign, Ralph, he's got a funny way of showing it, because me and you are suffering here. I'm not seeing much sovereignty. I'm not seeing much hope. I'm not seeing much, movement of the sovereign arm of God. And he'd say, oh, yes, yeah, God is sovereign. We're going to have victory. He is pushing through. He is going to make this thing happen. And I'd say, oh, Ralph, stop it. Give it a break. This is no time for positivity, Ralph, I used to say. This is no time for positivity. I said, we have to think seriously about this. And he said to me one time, he said, yeah, but he said, I'm just an optimist. I'm an optimist. I said, well, I can tell that, my friend, but I'm a realist. And we would laugh about these things. But, when you've got a friend like Ralph in your corner, and the thing that most bugs you about him is that he's too positive, well, you know what? That's really not the worst, is it? He so much loved life. He so much loved his family, and of course his Paulette, and his children and grandchildren. It was just infectious. Ralph's love of life was just infectious. But you know what was interesting also, as I think about Ralph, he never claimed to be perfect, and he never claimed to be the best leader. He always had a humility about him. And this humility was really demonstrated powerfully in many ways by the fact that he'd rather give his staff credit than take his own credit. And I can't tell you how many times when I was talking to Ralph, he said, man, Mike Snow is doing the best kind of job. He'd talk about George. He'd talk about, Mike Freak and I know, him and Mike often, well, Mike says they're like an old married couple, and they would butt heads, but he so admired Mike and Jenny and loved them. And Sian, he was so proud of Sian and so proud of Justin. And, there's a man who accomplished so much, but he was always content to let his staff shine and to push them forward. From Alex doing maintenance and supervision of the physical building, to the rest of them behind the scenes in tech, to the preaching, to the worship leading. He loved everybody he worked with, Sandra, and always spoke so highly of everybody, and never had to ever say, I accomplished this or that. It was always, look what God has done and what great people he's given me to work with. So, there's so much to learn from him, and I'm so grateful for the times we got to chat. So grateful for his encouragement in my own life, and so grateful for the characteristics he displayed, like I mentioned, friendship and being a visionary and a leader and a servant with a heart for people. There's so much to take and to model in our own lives. And that's when you see a guy like Ralph, and I mean, none of us are perfect, certainly not. But what we do is we learn from and emulate and model then ourselves on the best of what we see in them. And I'm really grateful that my friend left a lot that we could emulate and we could model from his life. And so to Paulette and the family, we love you. We hope to see you again soon. And to the staff and the congregation in Gander, we're praying for you. And we really believe God's blessing and comfort will be yours going forward. Yeah, folks, I really had to, really wanted to share that. He was a great friend to me and great friend to so many of you. That's so good to hear. Really so good to hear. I hope you're all doing as well as possible there tonight. Many positive comments. Ralph had it right. He imitated Christ by his life and his fruit. He was a pastor for the underdog. He truly was. He will be sorely missed. He was an amazing pastor, mentor, and the biggest cheerleader to everyone he met. That's true. Ralph looked beyond the barriers that so many tried to create. Absolutely. Mark says the building was constructed with expansion in mind. Yeah, and that was Ralph all over. God has done amazing things, and God's going to do more amazing things. It was literally constructed to be added on in the future. A lot of condolences here. I didn't know him, but I wish I did. Yep. Byron Boyd, reading the news stories at a Gander certainly shows an example of how ministry should be done. Watching from Humber Valley, and so very happy that Pastor Benson and I had a closeness that I will always cherish. We have an awesome, great team in Gander. You really do. He was an awesome pastor. He will be sorely missed. And of course, Ralph was great fun. He loved to come to church. I can picture him now with his, I used to say his Hawaiian shirts on that were untucked. I remember preaching there some years back, and I dressed up in a suit, and I did it. And I said to the congregation, I just wanted to dress this way to show you all in the congregation what your pastors are supposed to look like, because clearly neither one of them understands this, and we all had a great laugh over that. Ralph rebranded the church in Gander. That's what more churches need to do in order to be a resource to serve their community. Yep. He spoke life and love over and into each and every one of us. Yeah, that is really true. He really did. Kristen says, love my evangel team. Yeah, absolutely. He was the best. Yeah, I'd encourage you, if you knew and loved Ralph, to read through these comments. More comments coming in than I can even show here. First time I had deep fried ice cream was at Pastor Benson's house when us CAs got together. See, Gloria, that's a godly activity right there. He was so fun to be around, and he loved God and everyone around him. Roy says, I never met him, but I listened to him on Heart Matters. Yes, like so many others. Joy says he was an inspiration to church leaders everywhere. He was, actually. Very inspiring. And yet did it with humility and understood his own place in life. And I think Ralph was so profoundly moved that, as he would say sometimes, God took a drug addict and allowed him to participate in this kind of building of the kingdom. And yeah, thanks, folks, for all these comments. I'm sure the staff and Paulette maybe will get to look through some of these and see all of your thoughts. and your best wishes for them for certain. So yeah, I'm thankful to the Lord for Ralph's life, and I'm really grateful that that I got to know him, and I could call him a friend. Mike says society had written me off, but he accepted me and received me with grace. It's because of his investment in me that I'm still here today. Yep, absolutely, Mike. And you're not alone in that. So many others certainly have that kind of testimony about Ralph as well. So thank you, folks. By all means, continue to put your thoughts and your memories in the comments there, and we'll have them recorded then in this, and Paulette and the others can go through and read them as they're able. Yeah, God love you, Ralph. We are going to shift gears here a little bit now and talk about evangelicalism in North America and in the world. I'm grateful there's over 400 of you on now. I appreciate that. We have had some strange times indeed, which is part of what I have this called here, strange times indeed. You will know we have seen a pastor arrested, and he had quite the dramatic arrest right out on the street. We have seen churches locked down, including Trinity Bible Chapel in Waterloo, I believe that is. And we have seen, of course, throughout the whole pandemic, that Christians have gotten themselves caught up in a fair number of conspiracy theories. And we've seen a fair number of studies showing that evangelicals are among the groups who are not intending to get themselves vaccinated. And so very interesting times there for sure. I mean, when did you ever think that in Canada you would see a church locked by the RCMP or pastors arrested? But that's kind of the context we're in. And I'm happy now to invite to the screen a longtime acquaintance of mine, Dr. Brian Stiller. Here we are. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much.
I so appreciate you coming on tonight.
Well, it's interesting to have followed this very successful Sunday night rapport that you have with so many of your friends and colleagues on the Rock and the rest of the world. It's great to see.
Yeah, and by way of introduction, when I met Brian, he was president of Tyndale University, and the way I really met him was I was in to be interviewed for a job. And Brian was the president that hired me to be director of Pentecostal Studies. And that was in June of 2008 that I started, which is almost 13 years ago now, Brian. And we met him. Melinda and I came to Toronto and were interviewed by you in your office. Do you remember that?
I think in my 50-some years of ministry, one of my better hires.
I believe that, brother. I appreciate that.
I'm just confirming what you know.
I'm so glad you read that little line that I wrote out for you there. I really appreciate you doing that. Yeah, and Tyndale has been a wonderful blessing to me over the years, and I hope I reciprocated properly.
Well, it's an interesting part of the work of the Spirit in Canada. It's one of those places. It was the first in North America. Bible colleges started in the 1880s in Nyack, New York. The second one was Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And the third one was what now is Tyndale in Toronto in 1894. And it was part of a revival movement that also was connected to global missions. And so the first school really was to help people who wanted to go with China Inland Mission to China, Canadians who wanted to be trained. And so they needed to have training. And so the seminaries at that point, of course, weren't suitable. So the college started. And over the years, it's been an interesting kind of microcosm of what God has been doing here and globally.
So, Brian, I know you're global ambassador now for World Evangelical Alliance, and you've written on this. You've been a student of Canadian culture for so long. You've paid attention to the church and culture. What are you seeing from what's going on in Canada right now? Because, the idea of pastors being arrested in the streets and churches being locked down, that's way different territory for us. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that illustration that you use is so far out of what is the mainstream.
Right.
I think we have, we could talk more specifically, but the incident in Calgary, it's such a violation, in my view, of what it means to be a citizen of a country and a citizen of the kingdom, to act the way they've been acting. And I think that's asymmetrical to what I see as the church becoming in Canada. Let me just kind of back off and let me take an on-ramp to the question.
Okay.
When you go back 100 years in Canada, the early part of the 20th century, you basically had two communities, the Catholic and the Protestant. And the Protestant were all evangelicals. It was evangelical in theology and witness.
Right.
In the early part of the century, though, you have a shift out of higher criticism towards a liberal theology. And so the Protestant church was divided, and you have a liberal move, and then you have a conservative reaction. And out of that conservative response comes the evangelical movement and the Pentecostal movement in the early part. But through the first half of the century, as evangelicals, Pentecostals, and I'm a Pentecostal, and I consider myself an evangelical. We're part of we are on the tree of the Christian faith. Pentecostals are on the limb of evangelicals.
Right.
But what happened was we saw our witness, our calling to get people saved and ready for eternity. We didn't think that we had much interest in the public civic affairs of our country for two reasons. One, we didn't think that was our calling. And secondly, we assumed that those who managed society would do so with a biblical undergirding of faith.
Right.
And we thought they would build the culture and the country around this biblical vision, this larger historic biblical vision. Well, that worked for the first half of the century, but in the second half, we realized that taint wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going on. And we realized we had made two mistakes. One, we had failed to understand what the biblical call is as salt and light and leaven. What are those metaphors that Jesus used? What do they mean to us? And secondly, that the country was not moving necessarily along on a biblical vision of what a country should be. And so we re-engaged. And so the re-engagement has done a couple of things. One, or during this re-engagement, a couple of things have happened. One, the mainline Protestant church has really diminished. It's gone from what it was. 1925 was when the United Church created a single church out of most Presbyterians, all Congregationalists, and most Methodists. But that church has both lost its moral authority, but also lost its presence. The second thing is that the Roman Catholic Church, which has been a dominant force in our culture, especially in Ottawa, it through the secularization process of the 60s and 70s and 80s, it has become almost a non-factor as a public engager. Right. Even though as evangelicals, we have our closest relationship with Catholics on public moral issues rather than the mainline Protestant churches. So you have the mainline Protestant church dying, the Roman Catholic Church becoming losing her place and her moral authority, and the evangelicals in many communities becoming the ongoing religious center, the the continuing, the place where there was a continuing message of the gospel. And so that has happened in many parts of the country. So our evangelical churches tend to be the most active and the most central church in that community. But some other things are going on within that church. One is we have generational shifts. And what happens is you have fewer young people who are attending church. Now, at the same time, the evangelical church is a young church. And so your youth that are in churches of any kind in Canada, they're in evangelical churches. The second thing that's happened is that the broader secularization of the culture is increasingly marginalizing our ability to have presence in the wider community. Let me use an example. At Tyndale, the place where you are, when we became a university in the early part of this century, we wanted to join the Association of Universities and Colleges, which is the National Association of Universities in Canada. It's not an accrediting body, but it's a kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval community. They wouldn't let us join. They denied us entry because of our view of marriage.
Right.
Now, increasingly, the broader culture views our notion of sexuality as not only quaint, but unjust.
Yeah.
So as a result, our message and presence is they are disinclined to allow us in their communities because of what we believe. And the liberal secularization that's going on says not only do we think you're wrong, but we think that you have no legitimacy as a community of people. And thus, any of your people who come to us in government or in civic life, if they bring with them this vision of sexuality, which you promote, a biblical, what we would call a biblical vision of sexuality, that is so, they would say that's so discordant with the culture today that we think you are not only illegitimate, but illegal. So I think we are facing challenges in engaging in the public life over that issue, if not with others, that we have never known. So what we become, and when I see this stuff happening over the COVID thing and the churches fighting as they have done, it is so embarrassing, and it is so, in my view, in violation of what we as evangelicals want to do and to be, and how we want the culture and individuals and families to see Jesus. Right. So there's kind of a wide sweep that I'm sure will elicit a variety of conversations.
So, Brian, if they are outliers, the ones who are acting out in this way, and they surely are outliers, because I mean, there's 1,100 pastors in Alberta managing to hold services of some kind without having their buildings locked. So if they are outliers, and simultaneously we are facing a culture that believes our doctrinal system, our belief system, especially about sexuality, is now not just antiquated, but dangerous or offensive.
Yes.
How do you see the best way forward for the evangelical church? Like, how do we navigate this?
Yeah.
You know.
Let me just visit. Those 1,100 pastors in Alberta, most of them I don't see as outliers. They are simply trying to facilitate the worship of their people in ways that are in accord with their government. And
no,
I think
I was thinking the outlier is the guy who had his building locked down.
Oh, yes.
And Waterloo, and the guy who got himself arrested in the streets. I mean, they're outliers. The majority of Canadian pastors are serving best they can and cooperating with the restrictions.
Yeah. It's we could talk specifically, I guess, about that one pastor in Calgary, but maybe better subjects are more important at hand. What do we do?
What do we do?
Yes, that's the question. That is the question beyond all questions today. And I've been really seriously thinking about that. And what comes to mind, I was visiting in Kiev, Ukraine, a couple of years ago, with the patriarch of the Kiev Patriarchy, which is the Orthodox Church that relates to Kiev rather than Moscow. And he told me a story of a patriarch back before the Second World War, and they were being seduced by two people, Stalin out of Russia and Hitler out of Germany, because Ukraine is between. Right. And they were both wanting Ukraine to buy into their political vision. And they would give their stories, and they would give their rationale and their pitch. And the patriarch said this: when we don't know what to do with respect to that political decision, love children. And I asked the patriarch, what did he mean by that? He said, when you aren't quite sure which way to go, as in that case between Hitler and Stalin, the worst, the lesser of two evils, he said, do what the gospel calls you to do, and do it, and care in that case for children. And so when I think of where we are and this major tsunami of sexual shifting views, I think what we need to do is focus in on, and this is good old Pentecostal theology, but I think it's so true. Love Jesus, love people. Bring Jesus into the lives of people. Let our witness be so profoundly simple and caring that we avoid those political ditches, because there's nothing but trouble there. And when we try to persuade other people that we're right and they're wrong, we'll lose, because they have the laws and the Constitution on their side, which says you cannot have respect. You cannot have a choice with respect to sexual to sexual preference, in the sense of everyone is individual and has their rights. And I think that for us to get caught in that, and I think what I'm grateful for is the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada has been pressing hard to try and keep open this freedom, so that we are not sequestered by the current culture in ways that force us to either deny who we are or close down what we're doing. I think the EFC is doing a splendid job on that. But I think that the witness of the church, the activity of you had a perfect example. I mean, you got the both the left and the right. Ralph in Gander, what did he do? You told the story of how he went to the people and said, how can we serve your community? I mean, what is more Christ-centered than that? And what is a way of being salt and light and leaven more than that? To bring into your community a service, a heart, a desire to care and to bring your abilities and skills and resources into the well-being of the community. And that, to me, that's the model. So that's my response to that very, very important question.
I thought that's fascinating, Brian. Well, for one thing, Ralph is an excellent illustration of this, because he loved Jesus with all of his heart, and he loved every person he met, and did his best to stay out of the ditches. But this is a business of when we don't know what to do, we go love the children. I mean, that's fantastic. That's like, you can't get it any more straightforward than that, right?
And you do what you know you can do, and do it right, and keep it simple. And so when I look at the political division south of the border, you know, there's two things we know that in that case is that you don't speak wrong of another, and you love those who you consider to be your enemy. And it is a challenge for us in this day, given the political antipathies that we are experiencing, that we refuse to allow our Christian community to be trapped by any kind of political or social ideology. That is
okay. Let's chat about that for a minute.
Okay.
Because I was going to ask you, how do you measure, or how would you relate the impact of the elephant to the south on Canadian evangelicalism? Because the benefit you have is you're the global ambassador, and I know you see this from a bigger picture than just, the view of Canada. Talk to me a minute about how the U.S. situation is impacting us.
Well, the first is that we have such a huge window on that world, that for many people, that becomes the current reality rather than what's going on in Canada.
Right.
I'd
Yeah.
like to know how many TV sets tonight are turned to the US, to CBS's 60 Minutes, and not to W5 CTV Canada. I
Right.
suspect we're going to be overblown.
Yeah.
And so you've got that. You've got the US as being kind of the nurturer of the evangelical message, at least in North America. And many of our books and writers and favorite speakers are from there. And I think that most evangelicals tend to be to a more social and a social conservative point of view. Although it's interesting, up to 1997, the records show that evangelicals, to the greatest degree, voted liberal.
Yeah.
But when you have that, remember the Swiss air disaster off of Halifax, and when the prime minister had a service in Ottawa that was non-religious, some of the political commentators suggest that was the time that evangelicals said, we've had enough of this party, and they switched in mass to the Conservative Party.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So but back to your question about how the U.S. influences. I think that we have gone through a difficult time where it's been politicized by the pollsters and by politicians. When it says 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump, that's a misnomer, because those numbers fail to take into account a number of people who call themselves evangelicals but aren't at all, either in belief or in church affiliation. But
Right.
the fact is that your majority of evangelicals and conservative Catholics tended to vote that way, and as a result, the name evangelical became associated with that group. It's unfortunate because, and some people say, why don't you change the name? Well, it's difficult because the word evangelical comes from the New Testament word evangel, the gospel. And the word evangelical became functional during the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther called his churches evangelical. And when in the 20th century, when you have the liberal mainline Protestant churches, in a sense, losing the evangel, and the evangelical church took up the challenge, it is valuable, but also just to kind of spread the story a bit, maybe beyond the question that you originally asked. But today, there are 3 world Christian communities. Of the 2.4 billion, 1.2 are Catholics. 500 million would be mainline churches and Orthodox, and 650 million are evangelical. Well, the mainline Protestant church in the world hardly is known.
Right.
If you're a pastor, so I was out in Upper Egypt, and I talked to a pastor of an evangelical church, and next door, of course, was a mosque, because it's a Muslim majority country and community, and they got into trouble. They had some challenges, and when he went to that mosque and said, "Look, we are not some little cult or some little offbeat religious community. We are, as evangelicals, we're part of a 650 million worldwide Christian community. We are part of 25% of the world's Christians." All of a sudden, it gave them recognition with others and with the government. And so that as a name and as a world association, it allows us to coalesce together in ways that help each other. Now that's right. A little, I went away a bit from your question, so you may want to pull me back.
You're a Pentecostal, Brian. You can't help it. When you get preaching, who knows what the Holy Spirit, may lead you to say. So by way of pulling you back, I'm interested in the U.S. influence on us as evangelicals in Canada. What do you think that's been like overall? What's your sense of it?
Well, I think you have a couple of things. The cultural issues, I think Canadians recognize that as a country, we are different. We have a different history. We never fought a war to gain independence. We've always been part of a larger community, the Commonwealth. I think we have been predominantly a Catholic country. 47% of Canada has historically been Catholic. Evangelicals are about 7 or 8%. We are a more secular country. We're more like Europe in many ways. Yeah. And you have the secularization of Quebec that has changed us. And the U.S. has a very, very strong Southern religious vision
Right.
that is shaped by what's called manifest destiny. Manifest destiny means that as a country, you believe that God has especially chosen your country, the United States, through which he's going to manifest his destiny through your destiny. And so you are like the Boers thought South Africa was a place God had given them. As Abraham believed that Israel was the place that God had given, or the promised land was the place God had given him. So Americans have believed in many ways that America is especially chosen of God.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they call themselves exceptional. They're exceptionalists. You have then breeding within these two visions that we are especially chosen of God and that we are exceptional in the world. And then you add to that the most powerful country in the world. There's a sense of being special, and that their rights to maintain their religious focus is their constitutional right as well as the right of the gospel. Canadians, we don't have that sense that we are especially chosen or that the Constitution is there to support our Christian message. Right. So we don't rely on government to be our advocate as Americans do. And then in the States, you have huge numbers. You've got so many, you got 330 million people. We have 34 million people. So they're able to build up critical mass around. So you have people like Oral Roberts or Pat Robertson or a variety of people over the years in the religious communities, because there's enough. Pardon?
Falwell would be one.
Yeah, Falwell. Falwell was very, very important in building this, and because you have the larger mass, you're able to build critical mass around particular messages and personality. Yeah. And so the U.S. is divided. It has a particular vision of its future and its calling, and Canadians just don't buy into that. Some do. Some love the American ideology and the rhetoric, but I think Canadians have a different perspective. And just by the nature of having a small country, we tend to have a more global view, an interest in other places. Whereas in the U.S., they have so much going on. Their focus is pretty much to themselves. They're wonderful, generous people, and many have a great missionary heart. But I think our two countries have that essential difference.
Do you think Canadian Christians are paying more attention to the American message these days than ever before?
You know, I think the confusion and the division in the U.S. over the last few years may leave some with confusion, may leave some people apprehensive. I think that has yet to be shown. What we don't have in Canada, and we never have, Canadians don't work this way, we don't have dominant personalities or dominant movements like you have in the U.S. Just because we are spread out along this 4,000-mile highway that's about 150 miles deep, and that's where everybody lives. Broken up in the middle by about 1,500 miles where only moose and muskrat live. So it's hard to build momentum and consistency across the country. So that's one of the reasons, because we're so close to the U.S., we tend to take Americans at face value, and within the Christian evangelical community, we tend to be very impressed with their high flyers.
Are you paying any attention to Bill C-10 and this effort maybe by our government to regulate what's going out over the internet? Are you familiar with that? You tracking with that at all?
I am, but I'm because my work is mainly global. Although I've been sunk. Sorry, I've got to cut that off. There is because I tend to operate globally. I'm not as up to date on that, except that there is the EFC, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, has been very proactive in pressing back on the issue and bringing in conversations and debates to cause reflection and on the issue. I recognize what the government's wanting to do, but it does have. Here's the old story. It's like with the COVID issue. A government's knife is very dull. Governments, by their nature in policy, can't cut with a sharp knife. They cut with a dull knife. And so their attempt to bring control of these mega companies, what they do, they in doing so, there are extenuating circumstances that are caught by their policy that they never anticipated. And I think that's the issue that they're going through now. They've discovered that there are problems related to what they're trying to bring forward. And I hope that they will bring it back for reconsideration.
A final question to you, Brian, because you're so well traveled and well read. What's the difference in Canadian evangelicalism and what you see around the world? Or to rephrase another way, what message would you give Canadian evangelicals on behalf of what you see around the rest of the world? Like, give us a bit of global perspective on where we find ourselves.
Okay, interesting. You see, in 1960, there were 90 million evangelicals worldwide. 1960, there were 90 million. Today, there's 650 million. It's the fastest growing religious community in the history of the world. The world has never experienced this before with any religion.
Right.
And that growth is primarily in the global south. In the global south, we mean Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So, for example, in Latin America, in 1900, there were 50,000 evangelicals. Today, there's 100 million in Latin America.
Wow.
In 1949, there were 700,000 Christians in China. Today, it's between 100 and 140 million.
Wow.
So there has been the explosive growth that has happened, I think, for three reasons. And this is something that we could learn here in Canada. One is because 100 years ago, we came to a new understanding of the person, the work, and the gifting of the Holy Spirit. Secondly, there was an indigenous leadership that took over the old missionary enterprise. And thirdly, there was the rise of the biblical translation in the mid-40s, which has exploded to date. Good. So there is this major growth, and it's among young people. Mm-hmm. For us here in Canada, I think that the issue of finding ways within our own social, political, legal, religious world, finding a way to shine the light of Jesus. And I'm not being simplistic, and hopefully I'm not stupid. But I think that because of the other things that I've noted earlier, there is no better way to deal with people who are disbelieving than by introducing them to the love of Jesus. I don't know of many people who have come to Christ because they've been convinced that Jesus is right and others are wrong. But I do know of countless thousands of people who have come to Jesus because someone has loved them, has cared for them, has shown mercy, has set up late with them, has taken a meal over to them next door, has cared for their children when they have needs. The list goes on and on and on. To do in our world what Ralph was doing in Gander, that I think is the way to move forward. Now, if you were in Tanzania and Eastern Africa, you would have other social, political, legal factors to deal with. I love the line that Luke wrote in Acts when he said, in David, or Paul when he was preaching, and it was recorded by Luke in Acts, and David, after serving his generation, fell asleep. He served his generation. And so it's difficult for us to do global scoping on what works in one place does it work in another. But I think what you can do is that you can be culturally sensitive and spiritually perceptive and go into each community, and each community is different. Where you're sitting on the rock today, it's a little different than my little bedroom community north of Toronto in Newmarket. Yeah. So there are various dynamics, but at the very heart of it is people who are lonely and hurting and suffering, in whom Jesus finds his love And I think that manifestation of love in today's world of hate and antagonism and all kinds of social and sexual theories, I think that kind of expression is the most powerful way for us to move forward the gospel in our country.
That's really good, Brian. I'm thinking of a quote now. I think it's by Stuart Murray Williams, an Anabaptist over in the UK, and he wrote a book called Post-Christendom. And there's a quote there that I've used often. They've said, you know what? He says, you know what? Preach Jesus. No matter how distasteful our culture finds our institutions or our evangelistic activities, no matter how garbled his message has become, people still like Jesus. They are still fascinated by Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Go and preach Jesus.
Yeah. Live Jesus. Just live him out.
Yeah.
You see, when you look at this global explosion over the last 100 years, I think what really happened was people recognizing the work of the Spirit is that the Spirit lives in us, making us all priests unto him and all platforms of witness. It's not the priest, it's not the cleric, it's all of us who are mobilized through the week to live out the gospel, to shine the light of Jesus. That's what happened when people realized they too were called. They didn't need an ordination slip to preach or to witness or to lay on hands for healing. They indeed were the Spirit was living in them, and they were endued with power from on high to be his face, to be his life, to be his hands in their world. And I just think today that's the most obvious and the most straightforward way of dealing with our culture as individual witnesses of the Lord Jesus, the risen Lord Jesus.
Well, Brian, we'll take that as the last word. I can't think of a better way to end.
Well, wonderful to be with your people. I've got a prayer. As I've been sitting here, the phone call came in. My son-in-law has been rushed to the hospital. He has 3 boys. 2 of them have enormous intellectual challenges. The needs are great, and his name is Jesse. And if you, my friends, would offer a prayer on his behalf, and my daughter Muriel, who is looking after all the boys at home, and they all have COVID, if you would offer a prayer, I'd be so grateful.
I'll do that right now. Let's pray together. Father, we pray right now, Lord, for Brian's family. You see the need there. You see the sickness. You see he's been rushed to the hospital. You see his wife home with the children and all of the challenges right there. I pray, oh God, right now, and those joining me in the audience, we join our faith together and pray, God, right now, by the power of the Holy Spirit, you would heal. I pray, oh God, that you would restore and you would deliver. God, we know nothing is too difficult for you. We know you hear and you answer prayer. And the Bible tells us that if one can put 1,000 to flight, then 2 can put 10,000 to flight. So we join our hearts together, oh God. We join our faith together. And we pray and ask in Jesus' name that you would do this thing. And we believe, oh God, for a good report. And pray you would give Brian, oh Lord, and Lily and the rest of the family comfort and the true peace of God that passes all human understanding. And give them this peace, oh Lord, and this strength as they navigate these next few days, even while you're healing. And we thank you for this, oh God. We thank you that you're the God who answers prayer. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, and thank you for that prayer.
You're most welcome, Brian. Our love to you and Lily, and certainly to the rest of your family as you're going through this now.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Brian. We'll chat again soon.
Yeah, we will.
Yes, amen. Continue to pray, folks, for that situation. He was telling me earlier there are some challenges there. And I really appreciate Brian's time. I really appreciated the scope of the analysis he can bring. He was a great president while he was at Tyndale. He retired from Tyndale fairly early on in my time there. but I always learned a lot from Brian, and I'm so grateful that he joined us tonight, and we'll certainly keep his family in prayer. I'm going to shift gears again at this time as I do and move into our third topic. We're going to be talking with Dean Brenton, who's now president of Impactus Canada, on bringing a dream into reality. And many of you will know Dean or know of Dean from his time at YC, which was a youth convention, ran in Newfoundland from 2000, the first one I was at, to 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And just a few high points there on YC. Over 40,000 or around 40,000 students attended YC altogether. We had 2 YC events in Labrador in 2011 and 15. For 18 years, we blessed the local food banks, including 25,000 in cash donations over this time. We sponsored at YC about 1,000 children worldwide through Compassion and World Vision. Raised over $100,000 to build and resource the YC Children's Home in Malawi. Sent teams from across Newfoundland in 2008 to create a YC event in Malawi with over 14,000 people attending. YC gave $28,000 in 2016 and 17 to bring clean drinking water to Cambodia. And thousands of students encountered YC on the YC school tours that we did. And so when I was thinking about bringing dreams into reality, I couldn't think of anyone better to chat about this than my buddy Dean Brenton, who I will now welcome to the screen. How are you, sir?
I am well. How are you?
Not too bad. It is a tremendous privilege of mine to engage you in this manner on this night.
Yes, I'm sure it is. In the words of the great theologian Bugs Bunny, what's up, Doc?
Dean and I go back a really long time, longer than I want to recount. But suffice to say, I was at the first YC and never missed one after. And at some time served there on leadership in, trying to advise and give help to Dean as he went through. And Dean, tell me a little bit first about you. You served in Newfoundland a great many years, and now you're in Nova Scotia. Tell me a little bit about your new role for people who've not heard.
Sure. I know you. I think you got the order wrong. Usually, you warm up to the big guest, and so I'll forgive you for that.
Listen, you're the main event, bro.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just the appetizer. I do want to say, because it does relate to some of the things we'll talk about, because you started off, I think, your program tonight with talking about a good friend of ours, Ralph Benson, and who inspired many of us to dream big. And so my condolences go out to Paulette and family and Mike and the staff and the church in Gander, and I raised them because they were such incredible supporters through the years, especially the years that we brought the event to Gander. There was no one more supportive in the province than the church in Gander under Ralph's leadership. And
that's good to start there. What do you remember most about Ralph from that?
I remember the guy, whenever we would call, there wasn't a request that I could recall in all the years that we participated there that ever got turned down. It was, how can we serve you? And even though Ralph might have not been directly involved in the event, he was always there, always supporting, always worshiping with his kids, with his folks. And it was inspiring. And the last time, I believe, we were in Gander, we got a chance to do a Sunday night at the church, and just to see Ralph's enthusiasm, as much as if it was his event or not, he was there. It was inspiring, and such a loss, and such a good friend that he was to all of us.
He really was. That's what he was like. I remember being in Gander doing the YCs, and he could not have been more excited than if it was all his event.
Right.
And he had finally seen it come to reality. He was just as excited for you to be there as if he had thought it up himself.
Yeah, absolutely. To watch him worship in the stands like a crazy young person, to serving and helping, you name it, he was there. I mean, they would put the church on hold for us to be there, and sometimes the inconvenience of all that, and we recognized it. But that's how much he invested in the next generation, how much he believed in the next generation. And that's not always common, right? And so we highly valued that. And I don't recall an instance where we said, "Hey, Ralph, do you think we could?" And we ever got a no. It was always absolutely. And that was the way he served his generation. It was incredible.
Yeah, it really was. It's such a pleasure to watch him there at those, and so easy to deal with.
Incredible.
And so encouraging besides, because you will have had the same experience I had, where we sat with Ralph and been going through a challenge in ministry, trying to figure out how to get through something. And the same idea, Ralph would be, "Yep, this is tough, but we'll get there. We'll get there. It's getting better."
Yeah, he was relentless when on the dreams that God gave him and the passion he had. He was just relentless and never gave up. And he saw lots of those dreams come to reality, which was just amazing.
So tell us a little bit now to get back. Where are you now, and what are you doing these days?
Yeah,
I had meant to ask you that. I had meant to ask you to reflect on Ralph first. So I'm really glad you did.
Oh yeah, well, I couldn't let the moment pass because it was hard watching it from a distance this week and being so removed. Everything within me wanted to be on site and be there, and that was impossible. But I couldn't let the moment pass. So currently living in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. My wife Kelly is on faculty at the Acadia University. And that kind of sparked our move here. But I've been serving with Promise Keepers Canada and Pactus for a number of years on volunteer capacities. We were bringing some events to the island for a number of years. And I got invited to serve on the advisory board and eventually on the board and eventually as the chair of the board. And then last year, the president, Kirk Giles, decided that he was going to step away from the ministry. He felt God was calling him to pastoral ministry, which he's currently doing in Cambridge, Ontario. And at that time, I was chairing the board and just feeling like I've got my hands full. And I was living here at the time. And so I just parked that whole thing, but through Kirk's encouragement and some other close friends just really encouraged me to just consider this. So I resigned from the board and entered the process. And to this day, I don't know what they were thinking, but they started me in this role on January the 1st. So I'm the president of the ministry. It's been in Canada for about 25 years. It's undergoing a massive rebrand, reshift, refocus. And so, anyone in the right mind, in a pandemic, to go through a rebrand of the ministry and then to lose the president, like you'd need to check your meds, right? And I did, and the Lord still said you probably need to check this out and step into it. And so, I've been serving as the president, and it's been a great experience. It's all been remote. I haven't been able to travel since I started. I have an office in Burlington that I have yet to walk through the doors of.
Right.
I have been there before, but of course, all our team is remote right now because they're all in lockdown, and we have team members across the country and a core team in the Burlington area. So we meet every day, practically, lots of Zoom meetings and lots of conversations and planning and things like that. So so it's an exciting time, and it's still fairly fresh for me.
Yeah, no doubt. What a time to take over.
Exactly.
Take me back to 1998. So in the This is many moons ago now, Dean. But the first YC was in 2000. So I'll frame it for people a little bit. YC was a provincial youth convention that we did on Thanksgiving weekend. It ran it for 19 years. I put the stats up there. But there was a time when there was no YC. And there was even pushback to having this kind of provincial youth event because we used to have regional conferences. So in 1998, you were serving as provincial youth director, if I recall. So the whole idea here is taking a dream into reality. So give me an idea of where the dream came from that got us to, say, the year 2000 and history makers.
Well, you're going to test my memory now, but the good thing is you can fill in the gaps because you were there too.
I remember bits of it. This just tests how much you remember.
Well, you got it right. Actually, I was provincial youth director at the time. Had served before that as a regional director, and we were doing some really successful youth ministry events around the province. These regional youth conventions were actually very solid. A lot of, the one that we were doing in Lewisport at the time had about 800 kids showing up, and there were others similar. And we just really felt like God was stirring us, and it was growing. There was a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement around it, and it kept growing every year. And 1998, a number of things happened. One being the demise of the denominational school system in 98, which was also an interesting factor that played into some of our thinking around that. And we really started asking ourselves a question as a provincial youth leadership team: what would happen if we united forces and brought this together? What could God do in a province if we joined arms and hearts and worked to build a singular youth conference? And it was, as you said, wasn't met with open arms by everybody. It was there was quite a bit of resistance before it started and after it started, actually. So yeah, we started having those conversations, and a good friend of mine who had launched an event called YC in Edmonton, Mike Love, came and spoke at our youth camp one summer, and I'll still remember it to this day. Mike and I were standing at the back of the auditorium. There was worship happening at front. I don't recall who was speaking or what the content was. I do remember what Mike said to me. He was talking to me about what God was doing in Edmonton, how now thousands of young people were coming to arenas, were being saved, were being just ignited to do amazing things. And he looked at me and said, "Why not Newfoundland?" And it haunted me for 2 years. I could not give a good answer as to why not Newfoundland. Came up with lots of excuses, but no good reason. And so we started to have the serious conversation. I'll remember being at the boardroom at Emmanuel Convention Center in Lewisport with the youth leadership team. And it literally came down to a vote around the table: will we proceed or will we not? And there were a couple people that just really felt like, it wasn't time or it wasn't the thing to do. And we totally respected that. But we did say that we are going to leave this room, and we're going to leave united no matter what we do or don't do. We're just going to leave and agree. And so we voted, and it passed, and we began the process. And so in 2000, we started the work for year 2000, and we launched the first one in the glacier in Mount Pearl. And the rest is, as they say, history.
Yeah, it is history. And I was at the first one as a youth pastor. And then by 2001 had shifted into more of a teaching role, began to be involved with the provincial youth scene. And I'll tell the folks listening, Dean was really instrumental in keeping me around in many ways, because once I became unattached from pastoring in the local church and began to teach, I was kind of a free agent, as it were. And you go through all of that kind of time in your life. I was trying to figure out how to get teaching online, and I actually started online teaching in 2001 before it was very popular. But Dean was kind enough to involve me, and I started teaching at youth camp in 2000 or 2001, and eventually on the youth lead team, and then eventually on the YC team. And so it was really instrumental in a whole pile of my development in that sense and my interest in the youth culture. But what I remember is in the early days how intense the struggle was to pull one of these off. Most people wouldn't know if you just showed up, Friday night and waited for the doors to open at 6 or 6:30 whenever we opened them and let you all in at the freezing cold. And then you went through the whirlwind that was YC until Sunday evening. The behind the scenes stuff was, pretty incredible. And wondered, Dean, if you'd unpack for us some of the lessons you learned, starting in the early days and then through the later ones, in terms of how you actually bring a dream into reality. So, I mean, you go from 98 there to 2000. We're in Mount Pearl, right? In 2000 in the glacier. Is that right?
That's right.
And we had, I think, 1,400 students there. And it was just mind blowing that this had taken off. Talk to me about some of what you learned there.
Well, I learned first and foremost to get Dr. Bradley Truman Knoll on the team.
That's very kind, but that's not what you learned.
Number one lesson. Yeah, so many lessons. Some of them painful lessons, some of them encouraging lessons, some of them still I take to heart today. Yeah, I don't know. I hardly know where to begin. So many things, but I do recognize, when you talk about dreams and seeing things come to reality, you got to recognize the source of the dream. And we always really, really sought hard after God's heart for this thing. And in rooms, like I mentioned in Lewisport, to just praying it through to, the day of and through the events, it was always like a significant prayer effort as well. Because we really didn't want to plan something and then say, hey, God, now come and bless it. We actually wanted just to keep in step with what the Spirit was doing and keep up with what He wanted us to do. And so for 19 years, we chased Him around the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It wasn't Him chasing us. We were following Him, and sometimes there were left turns and right turns. Sometimes there were overseas turns and incredible opportunities. So, yeah, I guess one of the key things is really just having an assurance and a confidence that this is something that God wanted and His heart for it. And just being in prayer. But I remember that first YC event. It was Friday afternoon, and Matthew Wright, who was our prayer coordinator at the time, he and I, when we had most all our planning ready, it was pretty much wait for the people to show up now. So we jumped in a car. We were in St. John's. We jumped in the car and went to Signal Hill. And at the top of Signal Hill, we got out of the car. It was a beautiful, sunny, like October day, which is not always the case in St. John's in October, but it was just pristine. The ocean was flat, the sky was clear, and we got out and we looked across the ocean and we prayed the prayer of David that open the gates, let the King of Glory in, and we prayed that, and it was like God unleashed something in that moment that just continued for years. And it wasn't because of our prayer. It was just, again, we were chasing Him, and we stood on Signal Hill and said, okay, the ancient doors, the ancient gates of this North America, we're flinging them wide. King of Glory, come in. And we saw it happen. We saw it happen year after year after year. We saw it happen in Labrador. We saw it happen in other countries. And it was incredible, just incredible. that'd be one of the key lessons, I think, just the source of the dream, and always recognize that it's not, if it becomes my thing, if it becomes my dream, then it's probably going to be doomed for failure.
That's good. Give us another one.
Yeah, I learned this from a good leader friend of mine who told me sometimes when God gives you those dreams, to keep them close.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it's when I think of the story of Joseph, when God gave him the dreams that ticked off his brothers so much that they eventually tried to kill him. He didn't keep his dreams all that close. Actually, he kind of probably did something that was detrimental to himself at the time. Actually, was very detrimental. But it's important, I think, sometimes that we give time for these dreams to germinate, that we pray it through, that we confide in those that are close, trusted friends and advisors, and we learn and we bounce things off of people that we know can give us sound advice and say, what do you think? And they go, well, I don't, and then we can refine that. And eventually at some point, yes. And I remember it was at actually Bethesda Church when Mike Love was actually again, and he encouraged me to stand out on that stage and actually declare it or explain that we were going to be doing this. And that was the first real public moment, but it came after a lot of counsel, a lot of advice, a lot of meetings, and so it's important sometimes when God puts something in your heart, because sometimes our emotions can run away with us. Sometimes all the thoughts that we need to put into it haven't been formed yet. And if we tell it to the wrong person, they could either discourage us because they don't get it, or they could twist what we're trying to explain, and we not have the good answers because we haven't processed it. So I think dreams are sometimes a real sifting process and a refinement process.
Let me see this question here from Cindy. What doubts did you have for such an undertaking?
You're looking at the first one. Who in the world, what is God thinking? Number one, that he would ask me, kid from Central Newfoundland, the shyest guy on the block, who just, is the behind the scenes guy, doesn't love the stage at all. And so the biggest doubt and the biggest hurdle I probably had to overcome was me. That God was calling me to step out of my own comfort zone, to step into something that was in his comfort zone. And that was one of the biggest things. I actually think once I was able to overcome that hurdle, the rest of it was actually much easier, because I didn't doubt that God could do it. I doubted that he could do it through me. So I had to lean into that. I had to learn a lot of lessons, and he taught me a lot. Especially when we decided that we were going to take this thing on the road and go to Malawi, which we might talk about later. But that was one of the biggest faith leaps that we had ever made. But it again, convinced me that God knows what he's doing, and he can use the least among us. He can use those that feel the weakest and the most inadequate. But if you put your little bit in his hands, miracles can happen. Merib
says, I remember Dean being very shy. I still remember that.
Yes, my cousin Merib. Hi, Merib.
Jamie is saying Dean is a big supporter of other people's dreams as well. The merge would not be what it is today, apart from Dean's encouragement, support, and encouragement.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah. Dean, drill down a little bit there, because it's true. I mean, on a certain metric, you're not the most likely choice. You don't like the spotlight. I've spent hours behind the stage with you at YC, which is actually where you preferred to be, over to the side, behind the stage, looking at what was going on, making sure it was kind of okay. You would get up on stage once a YC, sometimes twice a YC, but I mean, the guys that we normally picture doing this, they got the mic up there every time you turn around. It's like their event, like they just can't get enough of the crowd. And you're so not like that. but yet you were clearly by and far the best choice God could have made in his wisdom to bring this to the province. So how do you, for a person who doesn't like the spotlight, how do you get yourself to the place? Like, so you had to realize you had every confidence in what God can do. You're not confident that God could call you to do it. How do you overcome that? Because I think a lot of people listening to us got dreams. They don't doubt God. They doubt God's wisdom in choosing them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they doubt. How do you do that? Like, how do you get there?
Yeah, it's a learning process. It's taking little steps of faith. It's, and my involvement and my comfort level from year 1 to year like 19 or 18 was a world of difference. But it was a growth that God had done in me, and a comfort that he had given me in the midst of learning how to do that. But it was also learning to be faithful in little things. And really, it was never about me. So I really didn't care. And some probably didn't believe this, but I really didn't care if I had the mic at all weekend. I don't think people would believe that, because they're so used now to the celebrity pastor. But I can assure the folks, if they believe me or not, he actually didn't care if he had the mic at all, because he'd be back there doing his thing. And as long as everybody else was shining and the thing was running well, he was happy with that. Yeah. And in the early days, there'd be times that the team would actually have to push me to go, no, you really need to do this, or you need to say that. And sometimes I had to push myself, because I'd naturally default to someone else can do it better, and which is probably true. But God was always preparing me and shaping me. And so one step became two became three became on and on, right? And so I learned through the process that, it wasn't just about doing a little segment. It was also, I could tell I was growing and following the Lord when I was learning that I needed to pastor these events. I needed to shepherd them. And it took on a whole new life then. It took on more than just I'm the event guy or the event coordinator. It was then about, God's entrusted, he's asked me to steward this moment. And so that means the team, it means the planning, but it also means what's happening in the moment. And we saw all kinds of things happen. And I was really grateful for, a really strong team around me, you included, and we would co-lead some of that stuff. I mean, how many times would I look to you or pull you up on stage, or you'd come and pray, and we just kind of, steward those moments, and God really blessed that, and he honored it. But back to the hurdle was me, and just learning to get more comfortable and learning to step out of the boat, and the first step. And you might sink a little bit, but you take a second one, and you learn, and you keep growing, and you keep just pursuing the Lord, and he's faithful. So a couple of questions here from Cindy. Did you say it took you 2 years to get over your insecurity? And would you say it's a natural process? Did it need to be forced once you said yes? Because I think what we're talking about now is the real sticking point for a lot of people, to be honest with you. 2 years, I would say. How old am I? I knew where this was going to go. not 2 years, Cindy. No, not 2 years. After a couple of years, I mean, there was some more confidence in what we were doing. We felt like, okay, we kind of figured this out, and it didn't completely go off the rails. So we did grow in some confidence. But I can tell you, as recently as November, when I had the call from the board of this ministry, that when they called, the same feelings of inadequacy and I'm not the guy and how could I ever do this, and they rear their heads again, because the enemy loves to play those tricks on us and say, oh, you're not the guy, you could never do that. And he's right. I can't in me, but with him, with God, I can. And I've learned that. And I was reading this week, Psalm 60:12 says, with God's help, we will do mighty things. But it's not me, right? It's with God's help. And so yeah, it was way more than a 2-year process. It's been a lifelong process for me, but one that, every year that YC happened, you could feel a little more confident. You felt a little more, okay, we understand, we're learning, we're growing. And then when new challenges would come, we could rely on some of the experience we did have to begin to shape it and morph it as God was directing us as well, to really the ultimate leap that we did when we took it overseas. And just those moments, the leading up to that were all preparation moments. But I don't think I've ever gotten completely over it. And in some ways, I'm kind of thankful I haven't, because it keeps me grounded and focused on that. I'm not the guy he is. He's the one, right?
Tia wants you to know that you are unreal. Linda says, leader being transparent helps the rest of us very much. Jason McGinn is weighing in here. Jason did always fantastic service at YC. Question here, Lauren, from Lauren. What resistance did you encounter to bring this style of music? I'm certain pastors opposed. How were you able to push through it? I, too, have heard rumors, Dean, that there was opposition. See, basically, folks, in this partnership you see going on right here now with me and Dean was the humble guy trying to be godly through it all. And I was the guy who said, this absolutely gets on my nerves, and wanted to go to war. And so between the two of us on some of these files, we tried to figure out the wisdom of God. But, I can go back and remember some fairly simple obstacles, but also some fairly large obstacles. And some of them were logistical, but some of them were personal. How do you push through? Because this is a great question. How do you push through the sometimes natural and sometimes not so natural obstacles that come in your way from bringing this type of thing to pass?
Yes, the rumors are true. There was at least one piece of opposition that came our way over the 19 years. We faced so much. I remember before we talked about the regional conventions, I remember we had a contemporary kind of worship band come in from out of province, and they did some music for the weekend. And I had at least 2 youth groups storm out, and at the back of the auditorium, they took strips off me for bringing this kind of whatever kind of music they felt it was. And
was that the year with the rapper?
No,
Jamie is talking about here. That was another year we got strips.
No, that was much later. Jamie is in the more recent history. I'm talking like 1997, 98. Yeah. I mean, because music wasn't what it is today, and acceptance inside, even just church culture was still somewhat resistant. I mean, we get some things through the Book and Bible House, some of the things, and some were frowned upon, some weren't. And so when we started bringing some of these artists and worship bands in, and then of course, heaven forbid, we put a light in the ceiling and had a little bit of haze in the auditorium, it was some people took high offense to it, and I understand why. It was different. It wasn't what they had been used to, and that was okay. But where it got mostly difficult was when those things became personal attacks, challenges to your leadership, and attempts to undermine things you're doing and discourage, and human nature being what it is, it was so easy to take that 1 or 2 emails afterwards that really were scathing or really confronting, and kind of forget the 100 emails or letters or whatever that of positive response. But yeah, we took all kinds of flack in the early days, from the style to the music to speakers to you name it. It was different. It eventually began to become more normal, more accepted. And I think people understood it was less about, people okay with the music style as much as I think they understood the motive behind it more. It was more, you're not just like, we weren't just doing it to bring concerts in or just to have, a great band or, laser light show or anything like that. We actually wanted kids to encounter the presence of God and to worship him in a way that was life-changing for them. And so we felt anything we should do should be done with excellence. And if the world could put off a concert, certainly God deserves as good or better. And so we felt, you know what, we should put that kind of excellence into our production as well. Jason McGinn, the ultimate production manager, who just said hello to me, but we put that kind of effort for 19 years into that. But the hardest challenges were probably the personal ones, and the ones that would sometimes go around you or not trust you or kind of undermine you, as even sometimes with friends. And sometimes undercut, what you're doing. And those were hard to get through, but, we really believe God was in this. We really believe what God had called us to was bigger than the flack that we would take or people's opinions. And so we just put our head down and we kept going. And we didn't look back. And when we faced obstacles, we answered graciously. You
answered graciously.
I answered graciously for you,
and they all grow up.
And we did our best to help people understand. And so a big part of that as well was just the PR piece of going out to local churches and doing youth rallies and things throughout the year, just to tell about what we were doing, the motive behind it, and what God was doing through it as well. And if all the things that you had put up in the first slide there hadn't have happened, it probably would have been a lot harder to, contain or keep the support sustained.
Yeah.
But, when kids' lives are being changed, when 100 kids, come to an altar on a Friday night, there's something about that that's pretty much undeniable, right? You can dismiss it all you want, but when kids' lives are changed and, God's glorified, I'll take the flack.
Yeah, and folks wouldn't necessarily know this, but I mean, some years were so intense that we had a structure set up that complaints would come to me first. And I'd try to deal with them, at the top end ever so gently, but I'd decide then what Dean had to hear and what Dean didn't have to hear, because he was trying to pastor the event and there was so much coming at us sometimes. We actually developed a system of triage that only the most important things would get through. You don't, people are saying here, you don't break ground easily, eh? You don't change people's perceptions easily.
No, change is hard. I mean, I still, leadership's about change management, but, helping people understand change, to adapt to change, and then to embrace change. I'm not sure what we were thinking when we put you on the front desk of customer service, but just think about it, folks.
So Dean is trying to tell you that he never made every right decision.
It's true. No, but we did. We had a way to deal with it, because if not, in the early days, I mean, you could get someone who becoming, I didn't get my program in my packet and want to come right to me to try to deal with that. And I'm trying to worry about getting this thing off the ground. And so I had a great team around me that really protected me, but owned the event to that level as well, that they, it wasn't about, man, I got to deal with that. It was like, no, I'm going to deal with that. Absolutely. Because what we're doing out there is way more important to deal with this person, complain about their program, not, being there's a mistake in the program or something. Right. And so, yeah, it was, there was a great team effort to pull that off.
How did it change for you? I'm going to shift directions after this one, but how did it change for you in the latter years over the beginning years in terms of your role in it and how you understood the reality of the dream? And I mean, because you kept trying new things, even in the later years, you did the road trips and different things. How do you keep it well, let's maybe put it this way. How do you keep it fresh? How are you, how are you making those decisions?
Well, just as we said, there was resistance to some of the things we tried early on. Human nature is what it is. We are all resistant to change, and we are creatures of habit, and we can get complacent. And so, just as yesterday's success, as great as it is, we can replicate that. But if we're going to take new ground for God, if we're going to try new things, and it comes with a level of creativity and risk and innovation. That's why we did. You alluded to them, and we were doing school tours for the last 5 or 6 years. We do tours of high schools with a keynote speaker around the province, into Labrador, just things like that. We did a lot of international mission kind of projects as well. We experiment with our technology and how we're leveraging some of those things. But I think as leaders, we've always got to attempt to innovate and try new things and learn what works, learn what doesn't work, and keep telling the story over and over. And so, I learned that if we're going to keep doing this and we're going to stay relevant to a generation, we have to continually reinvent ourselves. Now, that's not great for organizations or institutions or churches that, by again, human nature, get comfortable with the institutionalization of what we do. We just get comfortable. We've done it this way, and we've always done it this way. And I'm glad we never really landed on that over the 19 years. We always looked at, so what can we do this year? And it started to morph. I think the big change came when we stopped looking at it as a 3-day event, and we looked at it as a 365-day adventure.
Yeah.
And we started saying, what can we do at youth breakaway, at a youth camp? What can we do at a school tour? What can we do in missions? What can we do at a youth rally? And we started to really reach out throughout the year. And that's where it started to take a whole new life. And the reach was extraordinary then, because we were reaching kids who would never come to the event, but we were standing in their high schools with a speaker. I remember being over in Corner Brook with one of our keynote speakers. And I remember at the end of his talk, we had just a class session. We had about 45 minutes. He did his talk. It was a creative thing. And at the end, he had a lineup of senior students, so long that they had to kind of shut down the next classes. And they were lined up to come and talk to him, tears streaming down their faces as he shared his story with theirs. And you couldn't pay all the money in the world. You couldn't, it was just incredible. And that's where the reinvention, I think, really took off. And that's the big lessons we started to learn. Oh God, you wanted this event because you wanted to take this event way outside this event. And, whether it's me in my role now, or whether it's in the local church or in an organization, what you do now is never for inside the four walls of what we do or our institutions. It's always so that we can go outside. It's the missional impulse that the church should have, and that we as believers should have, to always be going into all the world. And it's so easy to let that go the opposite way, and it becomes all about us, and we get comfortable with what we do. But that was probably the big shift in our thinking, and the big lesson that we learned. And it really, in some ways, was a huge missional shift. Stop trying to get kids to come to a Christian event. Let's go and get to kids who are not Christians, and let's share the love of Jesus with them, no matter where they are.
Yeah, that's really good. I got a friend now who's going to join us on the screen.
Hey,
hi.
Hey, back together.
Yeah, you might have to turn off your camera and mute yourself at home here soon.
I also let me see is the best way to see us here. I also invited Pastor Newman, but he was unable to make it this evening. I was going to get the band back together.
Yeah, it's been great hearing Dean talk about that. I'm going to have to get my therapist on the line, though, talking about all those first few years of some of those events.
You can show us the scars, Dion.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about, Dion, when you're hearing all of that?
I mean, for me, I was there for the first few years, and then I left the province in 2006, I guess. So I was kind of there for the first few years, and it was really good to be a part of the first part, because I think it gave me and saw the vision. And even after I left, I was back to a number of YCs, probably every second year at least. I managed to get back for one reason or another. And it really is good to think about those early years. And certainly Dean had a way of being a leader that people wanted to follow him, but yet he didn't have to be the one that was leading. And I think a lot of people could learn from that. And we came from a day in youth ministry when it was the rock star mentality to some extent as well. And I think we all learned that we didn't have to be the rock star to be effective as a youth pastor. Now, I mean, you had the Mike Freaks and the Bruce Newmans and those guys who were the rock stars, but you can only have so many of them, right?
That's good. I got a question here from Rudy. I have so many wow moments of how God worked through you through YC. Do you have one that stands out? I'll toss that to the both of you. Do you have a moment that really stands out for you, or more than one?
Dean, you go ahead first. I've got to narrow it down here.
Wow, that's a hard question, Rudy. And you helped us at so many events yourself, so you saw some of those wow moments. Two come to mind. One is Mile One Stadium, St. John's. We are in a worship time, nice vertical hats. Dr. Noel.
What year? Is that 2001?
2004, I believe.
He's just making stuff up, Brad. Don't worry.
I don't think he knows. Dion, do you know what year is vertical? Anyone know? I don't know.
I have no idea. I don't know what year this
Sorry,
is.
2002. 2002 it is.
Because I have a shirt from every single year except this year where I have the hat.
2002.
But anyway, sorry to interrupt, but Rudy mentioned that I should have the thing on. I thought, yeah, this is the night to wear it.
Yeah, you might as well. Yeah, so Brad might remember this. We were on just amazing worship time. Matt Maher was on stage and Mike Pilavachi was in the house. He was about to speak and the Holy Spirit was really doing something significant in the auditorium. I'll never forget it. And just the what God was doing in the room. I don't need to go into all the details, but just seeing the coordination of what God was doing, our keynote speaker, who was an Anglican minister, our Catholic worship leader, and this Pentecostal kid on stage, and watching God orchestrate his church to speak to a generation was like, oh, wow, this is like legit. And the other one, the other big wow was when we actually did take this on the road and went to Malawi, and it was just like we must have lost our minds when we came with this idea. But anyway, we did, and when we opened up the doors to the soccer pitch on the first night, and thousands of Malawians came to faith in Jesus, like just flooded altars. It was like, oh wow, like this is real, like. It was in those moments I got, okay, God, you can do absolutely anything. Like, I'm just going to shut up and let you do this.
That night with Pilavachi, I remember, we had not sold this as a denominational event. We were very, very intentional about making sure it was interdenominational, but we were the Pentecostals. And so there we were backstage, and Pilavachi is up there, and he's an Anglican priest, and he sang in his lovely way, oh, the Holy Spirit is about to do something over there. Oh, there it is. and people were breaking out in tongues. And went, oh, how so lovely! There, oh, and he's now going to do something in the. Oh, there it is. Yes, in the back. Just carry on. It's beautiful. And our Catholic was leading worship, and we were going. This has just got to be the wildest taste of heaven on this side. You know, it's just everything kind of flowing together. I'll never forget that for sure. It was like we had nothing to do with it in so many ways. Dion, what do you remember from the early?
For me, I do have some specific memories of the event itself, but what sticks out for me as a youth pastor at that point as well was the impact and effect that it had on our youth and our teenagers that came with us, and maybe it was Dean's influence, maybe it was part of being a committee member for so many years planning that I've seen, and I've shared this so many times, but we've all seen so many teenagers go to an event and they come away and they're going to change the world. And a month later, they're in a worse place than they were when they went to that event. And I really started to focus on leading into YC. What are the themes? What are the ideas? What do I need to talk about? What Bible studies can we do? And after it was over, we would do months of follow-up and talk about the things that speakers covered. And for me, it was the memory of, and one thing that I was on the committee, very often the committee would be together in one of the local hotels, and they would have different duties. And I always, from the beginning, I said to Dean, the one deal is I want to be able to stay with our youth group. And so we spent a lot of time together in the hotels, doing devotions, sitting around praying for one another. And those are the things that I remember so that are so real. It's the 12:30 nights where you're sitting around the hotel room with 15 other people, and you really should be thinking about going to bed, but instead you're just talking about how life is being affected by what you're seeing and hearing and sensing at YC. But yeah, so there's so many memories that really do stand out. But for me, it's just a general memory of that, and just to share a story. And if the person's listening, that mother, they may remember this, but it was pre-YC, and it is probably the event that Dean was talking about, where the youth group stormed out when we were up on the hill, and one of the girls in our youth group was there, and about maybe 2 months later, she approached me, this mother, and she said, I didn't agree with the music, I didn't agree with the lights, I didn't agree with all of that stuff, I didn't agree with a lot of what you were saying and encouraging people to do. And then she went on to say, but she said, I've seen a change in my daughter, and she said, to me, that's what really matters. And I don't know if that person ever really accepted what we were trying to do. I mean, it wasn't that it was wrong or a sin. Well, some called it that, but in this case, it wasn't that. It was just simply that it was one of those things where it was outside of their comfort zone. And I think Dean kind of alluded to that earlier. It was different, something that we weren't used to. And when that, so for me, it's those changed lives that make the difference. And I think for all of us that had any involvement in YC, at the end of the day, it's not really the event or the band you had. It's the lives that are affected and changed. And we hear stories all the time of what God did through that.
Dion just reminded me that, and I was in the same boat as Dion. Like, we were all youth pastors when all this started. Like, we weren't being paid to do this at all. And so for years we ran this, and we were, looking after our groups and, going back to the hotels and worrying about all those things at the same time of running this. But I think that was one of the things that we recognized, that change Dion alluded to. We were seeing it in our own kids as well. And so it wasn't just about, oh, those are the event guys, they do that. We were actually doing this for our kids, and we were seeing their lives change. And so we just wanted every kid to be a part of that. And so, it just reminded me that for a lot of years, we were doing this and running youth ministries because this was all volunteer stuff until like later years, right?
What I loved about youth camp, YC, regional conventions, whatever, was that the amount of time that you spent with teenagers, with your youth group at a youth camp, a week long, 5 days, 6 days, whatever, the amount of time you spent with them, it may have equaled weeks and weeks and weeks, months of getting together on a Friday night at youth group. It's where you really got to know people and where they really got to know you. And I think that really is the strength of some of these events like a YC, is that it's an opportunity for you to begin to see the lives of your youth and really get to know them in a way that meeting for an hour and a half on a Friday night would never facilitate.
There's another angle too on this, and Dion, 2006, you started your official journey toward the BGA, and it was that year in St. John's. Of course, we partnered, and we saw the largest, of course, we saw our largest registration that year. But then we were able to partner and do a major outreach on the Sunday with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and Dion's own journey began to take a whole new path from that point on as well, which is pretty amazing. Like from, you know, no name youth pastors to these incredible opportunities just to see God take us in different avenues. And yeah, it was just amazing. It's
funny you mentioned that. And this goes back to what Dean kind of shared, I think, earlier. It wasn't stated this way, but essentially is what it comes down to. I think all of us have to be who we are, who God called us to be. And if it's loud and love the crowd, that there's a place for that. But there's also the quiet, the behind the scenes stuff that maybe both Dean and I kind of tend that way. And even when COVID started, and I think I'm tired of saying it now, but it's been joked many times that I trained all my life for COVID. But I think we're really getting tired of the separation at this point. But going back to, you have to be yourself. I remember the person who became my boss at BGEA when I left St. John, Steve Weil. That event that Dean alluded to on Sunday night, we did an event with Halifax at the same time. So I think Halifax event was Friday night, and then everyone came over to St. John's on Saturday, and we did our event Sunday night. And Mike Miller, that many of you would know Mike, he was the MC for the Friday night event in Halifax, and I was the MC for the Sunday night in St. John's. So after the event was over, everything was done, I started my role with BGEA, and I found myself on stage more than I had in the past. Steve was talking to me, just reviewing stuff, and he said, you should watch the video of the Halifax event. He said, and just Mike did a really good job. You should have a look at that. It's like, what are you trying to say, Steve? So obviously Mike Miller and I are different people, but we have to be who we are, I think.
Dion, reflect a little bit for me on what you heard earlier in the sense of bringing a dream into reality. How do you get out of your own way, in a sense? Like, God calls you to something. So people don't know Dion. Dion pastored in Newfoundland for quite a while. He was in Goose Bay, to Annie's question, and then left in 2006 to work with Billy Graham Association. How do you wrap your head around the kinds of things God calls you to?
I think, and I've been reflecting on this to some extent for a couple of days, as you told me the topic, and kind of, we text back and forth a bit about this. I think the main thing is, in most cases, I think God uses us as leaders in a way that we didn't plan it out ourselves. Sometimes we plan, all of us plan for the future, but rarely does it work out the way that we had intended. And this is over 30 years of pastoral ministry and ministry with the Billy Graham Association right now for me. And that just blows my mind, where I look at where I am today and how I got here. And really, it was being who God called us to be. And I've shared this quite a bit, but not in a public forum like this. And I have no idea if Mike Freak will even remember what I'm talking about here. But back when Mike was youth pastoring in Gander, I was at Elam, and it was the first one I went to Elam, I think. And we thought, rather than paying extra money to bring someone in from Ontario for our youth weekend, let's kind of exchange trips. So Mike, you come in and do our retreat. I'll come out to Gander and do yours. So we agreed on that. Mike came in and just did an incredible job. And of course, Mike being on the cutting edge back then, he had the best possible overhead projector slides that you could get at the time. And but he had all the video clips. He had it all figured out, and just did a tremendous job of speaking to our youth, and just a very gifted speaker. And I started going, how can I do that? I can't. They listen to Mike every weekend, every week they hear him speak, and he's so creative. That's not who I am. What do I do? And I found myself preparing and thinking, okay, I've got to up my game a little bit here. I've got to figure out how I can insert some of these movie clips, and I've got to figure out how I can do it this way to kind of be attractive to these teenagers that he's got in his youth group. And I went out there and I was wrestling. And finally, about 10 minutes before our first session started, I just said, God, this is not me. I can't do this. You just gotta take control of this weekend. And I went out and I confessed to the youth most of what, I can't remember exactly how far I went in saying what I'm saying now, but we had an incredible weekend. And I think from that point on, and I kind of knew it before, but there's a difference in knowing and actually believing. And I think from that point on, I actually believed that I didn't need to be like anyone else. I just needed to be who God called me to be. And I've always did that through youth ministry. And I think the same thing in the ministry that I'm in right now. I didn't set out to be the director of ministry with the Billy Graham Association. I went to St. Anthony in 1990 to be a youth pastor, and I didn't know if I was ever going to get out of there. Well, not alive anyway, but but I did. And so many incredible memories through the years, and going back, and Dean was part of this. There was a lot of really some pioneering stuff that took place. And I saw Bob Dooling making a comment earlier, and I mean, it was we had many meetings with Bob back in the day when all of this started, the regional conventions, and I do have to apologize for Bob for the year in Stephenville that he chased me all over Stephenville in his car, and I don't know if he ever knew who that was, but I never did get caught. That's the main thing. Oh man, I hope my mother's not watching. I mean, that was someone else running all over Stephenville.
Well, that is, to your point, that is something the three of us helped each other figure out in the early days, was be who God called you to be, and don't try to wear anybody else's armor. Try to stay in your lane. Yeah. And we had to sort that out, because I mean, I came back to the island at 30, already highly educated, and not feeling like I fit in. Didn't certainly feel like a youth pastor when I was one. I never had a clue what I was doing. And met the two of you, who in many ways also were trying to figure out how you go, and never ever felt you fit into the stereotypes either. And the three of us, I think, and this is the power of community, the three of us helped each other walk in our giftings. And I really never tried to be Dean, and Dion never tried to be me. And
no.
Well, you're always too saved to try to be me anyway. But that's an important piece, because I'm starting to believe now in my old age that so many people have dreams and callings on their life, and they're short-circuiting their own path because they just don't believe God can do it through them. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about managing insecurity. your own insecurity in because that's where I think people trip up, is their own insecurities, not God's power or God's vision. They're insecure.
I think there's a part. There's two, for me personally. There's two parts. I think there's the insecurity part that I think I've come to deal with that to some extent, but then there's sometimes maybe the confidence that someone else can do this better, and I don't know that ever really changes. And I think it's one of those things where there's also a part of me that, and I think Dean may have mentioned this earlier as well, that's a good thing because it keeps you grounded. I mean, Dean, you go back, and Dean and I went to college together for the 4 years. I think he may have been a little smarter than me and only spent well, actually, he wasn't much smarter than me, because he spent some time at the Lyle Street House as well, 7 guys in our last year of college, and that wasn't. I think we went the entire fall, and there wasn't one point where everybody in that house was asleep at the same time. So he wasn't much smarter than me, but I think that it comes to the point where you realize that you have to do this whether you want to or not. If I have to get up and preach, if I have to get up and speak, if I have to address a board meeting, I have to do that whether I want to or not. So you just kind of say, you know what, I'm just going to do this. And there's the insecurities that you deal with personally. But for me, there's also the side of it where it's that's a good question, Brad. I think really the insecurity part is overcome by just doing and relying. With that insecurity, it can also be a positive thing where it keeps you grounded. And I mentioned, this is where I started to go a few minutes ago. Dean and I went to college together, and you could pick out the leaders that you thought, man, they're going to make it. They're the talented ones. And I think so many people get messed up in Bible college because everyone who goes to Bible college are usually the cream of the crop from their church, and everybody looked at little Johnny, and he could do no wrong in their eyes. Well, when you get to Bible college, you've got a school full of little Johnnies who are way more talented and have more abilities than you. But I think as we look back at the people that we thought were really going to go somewhere because they were the gifted speakers, they're not always the ones who are leading the charge right now. And so I think that there's a part of that that we thank God for our insecurities and our sometimes lack of confidence, because it forces us to rely on God and the Holy Spirit as opposed to doing it in our own strength.
What are you thinking, Dean?
Yeah, it's really good. I wish Dion would stop telling stories from our past, but you're going to get it.
Listen, he got to tell him while he still remembers them, and time is short.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Dean is much older than I am.
Yes. Two thoughts. One is we can use, because I agree wholeheartedly with what Dion said, and just to spin off that, I think we can also, I can tend to use my insecurity as a crutch or an excuse that I can hold myself back because, oh, well, I can never do that. And sometimes God says, no, take a step and trust me, and I'll be there with you. But sometimes we can be paralyzed by our own unwillingness to actually take that first step. So, this is personal experience, but I think the other part of insecurity and the transformation of insecurity is actually understanding how secure we are in Him, right? And I wouldn't be here today if my own faith is not expanded and I had not stayed anchored to who He is. Like that is the core of everything. And so that begins to erode away the insecurity I have, because I have way more security in who God is and who He's called me to be, that at this point in my life, I don't really have to impress a whole lot of people. It's like, I'm just going to be what He wants me to be. And it's I've not always been that way. And it feels very good to be in that place. Right. And I still wrestle with it. I just, in November when I had that call, I was like, are you sure? But you step out and you go, okay, well, I'll trust you, God. and just be confident and be secure in your insecurity. And I think you'll find that God is a lot more faithful than you realize he is.
Yeah, sometimes you don't recognize that faithfulness until you start looking back over the years. And when it comes very quickly, we don't always recognize and notice it. But when you see the bigger picture, you can see how everything fit together.
100%.
What would you say, Dion, to younger leaders who are watching and younger viewers? Like Cindy is asking, how do you know when it's time to take a step, and how do you determine what the steps are? Like, what advice would you give to 25-year-old Dion now?
I think one of the things that we definitely need to do is find a way of pushing the envelope in our lives, but yet respecting the leaders that God has put in our lives as well. And I think that was always a tough balance for us in the early days, because there was so much opposition, and there were times where we felt like everybody was against us.
There were times, Dion, when everybody was against us.
That's probably a good point, but I think that as we have to recognize the leadership that's there, be loyal to that leadership, and I think I probably told every senior pastor that I served with, and I've told my executive director, who's my boss now, that I will always have their back. I will always defend them publicly. I will not talk negative about them. And if I do, then I'm going to be in here with my resignation, because that's not the way it should be. And I think another thing that we have to remember is that we need to be patient, and we don't develop into leaders overnight. And I've met a lot of people who think that they've got 2 years of experience in some area of life and now they know it all. Or you get that theological degree, or you get the master's degree. Well, now you know everything. And I'm sure that Brad, Dean have both realized as well that there's a lot of things that we don't get taught in college that the textbook can't teach us. And it comes down to following the leading of the Holy Spirit. And there have been so many teenagers through the years say, well, how do I know? And it seems like it's always the teenager who's, what do I do with the rest of my life, that asks the question first. But how do I know what God wants for my life? How do I know what God's will is? And I have always said, if you want to know God's will, you need to know God. And when Tammy calls me and I answer the phone, I know it's her. If I don't know it's her, I'm in a lot of trouble if I don't recognize her voice. And I think the same thing applies to God, the Holy Spirit, is as we get to know him better, as we get a closer relationship with him, we begin to realize and recognize the voice of God, opposed to the bad pizza we had the night before. And I think that's the reality, is that it's getting to know God more. It's having a confidence that you're on the right path when it comes to where God is calling you to serve. And it's working with the leadership that God has put in place to be around you. And I think if we deny any of those, then we're not going to be successful long term in what we're doing.
Any thoughts on that, Dean?
Yeah, I was thinking the same. Like none of this stuff you just can't run ahead of the leaders that God has placed in your life. Like submission and being under authority is so important, and being willing to learn and listen. There were times, we had to make difficult choices, and we had hard conversations. But, I think at the end of the day, we did our best to be respectful, and as we did that, more doors opened for us, and more latitude was given, and more opportunity. And eventually we found ourselves in leadership roles where we could actually do some of these things, and didn't have the same hoops to go through to see it happen. So I think that's such a good word to be aware of, that part of the part of the dream process is actually a submission piece. Just another piece too is just this whole faithfulness in the little things is just a huge piece. Like you know, it was the willingness. Like when we started YC, like I remember, and I'm not a finance guy, but I was crunching the numbers. I was doing the Excel sheets to make sure we were on budget. Eventually that grew into a full team, thank God. But you know, sometimes it's doing the things that no one else really wants to do or can at the time, but you just being faithful in those little things are, I believe, seasons that God prepares you for opportunities in greater things. I was talking to David Wells just a few days ago. We were on a call, and I still remember going to a Firehouse Youth Leadership Conference over in Halifax, took a youth leadership team. My first church in Botwood, I was there at the time. And I don't remember a whole lot about it. I do remember a ferry ride and a few things like that. But I remember Dave being a keynote speaker, and I remember this line that still sticks with me to this day. And he was talking in the context of youth leadership, but the most spiritual people in your youth group are the ones who stick behind at the end of the night and clean up the styrofoam cups. Well, that was before styrofoam cups were really not environmentally friendly, but the point remaining.
Paper straws now.
That's right. You know, it's being willing to be faithful in the little things and serve where you are, and then God opens doors, right? If you're willing to do that.
I always made that from the very beginning of youth ministry. I kind of made the rule in my own head that when we go away on a youth retreat and we had to, we would have kitchen staff. In Labrador, for instance, there'd be a group who would come in and cook for us, but we would have to do the chores. We'd have to clean the bathrooms. We'd have to clean the place and keep the place clean and that sort of thing. And I always felt that it was something that I couldn't do up a schedule of chores without including myself on that list. And because if someone complained about doing the dishes, well, you can do the toilets for me if you want. But I think it was just one of those things where leaders need to realize that God's put you in a place to lead, but you're not more important, you're not better, you're not above those that you're serving with. And I think there's lots of ways that young leaders can learn that in very practical ways and realize that. And Dean, I mean, the reality is in the early days, we had no choice but do a lot of that stuff because there was no one else to do it, right?
That's true. Yeah, when I started my first staff meeting with the new team that I work with now, they introduced me, you know, here's Dean Brandon, he's our new president and all those things. And so after they did their formalities, I just told a little bit about my story, and I said I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this new title. And I said I actually prefer if you'd call me the CSO. They're like, the CSO? Yeah, the Chief Serving Officer. And I was serious because I really believe the greatest, you know, are the servants. And if I'm unwilling to serve, if I'm unwilling to do the things no one else wants to do, then really I probably am not fit for leadership in many ways. And it's not that you always do those things or, you know, God, you know, pulls a team around you to do a lot of that stuff. It's the willing heart, though, that's behind it that makes all the difference, right? And I hope, you know, whoever is listening, and I hope myself, like, we'll always stay in that serving posture and never, it's about me, it's about my dream, it's about me being the leader, you know, the celebrity superstar Christian, right? It's bound to fail. But the greatest in the kingdom, according to the book I read, is the servants.
And Dean, for the 20 years or more that I served with you, I saw the same thing from your life, where you did what everyone else did. And I think that has to come from your heart. You can't just kind of say, okay, that's the new rule I'm making now, that I'm gonna do that because everyone will see my humility. Well, no, it really has to be a posture of your heart, or and maybe by telling that, then I've just lost the last 30 years of humility. But it really does. It can't be something, I think, that you just kind of, if you want to be used of God, you have to make that determination in your heart. Say, God, I really am the least of those around me. And I look at the team that serves with me now. and the team that served with me in other places as a pastor. And I had a lot more talented people than what I was. But I look at it and go, if I'm weak in an area, then I need to get someone to do that for me. Like, I don't mind letting that go and let someone else do a better job than me. And I always remember one of my senior pastors said to me, he said, Dion, I will never hold you back in being successful here as a youth pastor. He said, because if you are successful, he said, I will be successful. And I think that's very key for us to remember, that if our team around us is successful, we will be successful as well, or at least appear to be.
And I'd like to bounce off that to say, you know, one of the reasons we are where we are is because there were people older than us who believed in us and believed in the vision. Like, I went to my first YC, I was 29, which means, Dean, you were leading the first YC in your early 30s. And we had people then who were in their 40s and 50s who believed in us and made a way and allowed us to stand on their shoulders. We've had those kinds of mentors in our lives. And I'd encourage those of you who are listening and you're our age now, make a way for somebody who's younger. Use your influence in your voice to promote somebody and to encourage somebody who's younger, and run tackle for them, knock some obstacles out of their way. And because it's not real easy to lead when you're 30, you've not got a whole lot of life behind you, and you're chasing dreams and visions and you're enthusiastic, but you really do need some folks who've been around a while, not to get in the way or to put you down, but to clear the path a little bit. And I remember being grateful for those who helped clear our path some and believed in us and what you're doing. Dean, you remember that?
Oh, 100%. If it wasn't for some key leaders and in key moments who would stand with us or support us, and even sometimes not even sure what we were doing completely, but still had enough trust that they would allow us to do those things. I just thinking, as you were saying that, you know, one of the things, I think the lessons I've learned about dreams is the dream is never about me, which is a little bit of a fallacy we can play. And God puts a dream on my heart and it's somehow my dream. The dream is always about the people coming behind me. It's always about the next generation. Like when God gives Joseph the dream, it wasn't about Joseph. It was about saving his family and an entire nation. And sometimes we get tripped up in ourselves because, oh, well, God's got he's got a dream for me. Yes, he does. But the dream is not about me. I'm just facilitating his dream for the people around me and the world. And so we got to be careful. We don't put ourselves in front of anything or anyone else. Right. And that's why it's so important to raise up other people. I'm seeing Noel George's name pop up there, right? Noel just served like a heart of gold on our YC team for so many years, and just gave and gave and gave because he saw the big vision of that, and so many others, and and that's what it's about. It's never about us. It's about what we're doing for someone else.
I'm gonna toss one more to you now, since it's after 11:30 down here. And this is a compliment to us, and so I hesitate to put it on the screen, but Crystalline, as always, makes a really good point. She said, be a challenge to count the number of young people who have and do look up to the three of you as role models, and it's remarkable to know that even you, as you're saying, felt as though you didn't fit the standard mold. So many young and old struggle with knowing their place. And Crystalline, I thank you for that, of course, but it's absolutely true. Neither one of us, and I'll speak for the other two and they can speak for themselves, felt like we fit in. When we started all of this, we just felt like misfits. We did not feel like we were the stereotypical, whatever it was we had in our minds. And guys, I wonder if we can close off by just talking about that again for a minute, because there are so many people, again, they're self-shorting their own dream and vision. They're cutting themselves short because they just don't feel like they fit whatever mold it is in their head. Can you talk about that for a minute for us?
Dion talked about it a little bit earlier, just being, about really being comfortable and confident in who you are. And what you just described is how I started in ministry. I just felt like what in the world am I doing in ministry? Because I felt like I was like no one else, or no one else was like me. I didn't have the pedigree. I didn't have the voice inflection when I preached. I didn't have.
And you still don't. You need to work on it.
I know. I'm working. I'm taking lessons. I didn't have all the I don't know, just the charisma. And I looked around at those that were so much what I thought better than I was, and I thought, God, you must have made a mistake. And I've realized, you know what? He never makes mistakes. He actually wants you because he needs you with the gifts you have, because no one else has your gifts. And if you don't step into that, the last thing he needs is just another cookie cutter mold out there of someone else doing it like someone else. He needs people and us to step into serving him in the unique characteristics and skills and gifts that he has implanted in us, because that's exactly how he's designed it. And that's what makes the world beautiful, what makes ministry fruitful, and takes away the insecurity and the fear, because I don't have to be Dion, I don't have to be Brad, but together, as we lean into our strengths and our gifts, man, like so much fun can happen and so many exciting things, because the pressure's off me now. I'm just going to be me. And if people don't like it, that's okay too. But I'm just going to be me, because that's all I have to work with. And so it's okay.
Brad said I could speak for myself. I couldn't, because he keeps muting me. I apologize. It's a beautiful evening here, and there's lots of Harley Davidsons going up and down the street behind me here. So you hear that. But I think ministry in general, and I use ministry very broadly, because I think that was one of the faults of our generation when we were in high school. When you said ministry, it meant pastoral ministry, and I don't think ministry was really recognized. And one of the things that I always said to our youth were that every one of you, if I say to you, what is your ministry? Every one of you should be able to answer me and tell me what your ministry is within this youth group. And whether that's stacking chairs or leading worship or preaching a message, I don't care, just as long as you have something that is yours. And I think, thinking back to Dean and talking about our what we sounded like and what we felt like, and I remember the horror back in the day when we'd always have our sermons put on a cassette tape, and you'd go back and you'd listen to that, and you were horrified. It's like, do I really sound like that? And I think everyone in public ministry had that, or that spoke publicly had that experience at some point. But I don't think it's changed through the years, in that ministry has to be about relationship. And in a day where people have more friends than they've ever had before, whether Facebook friends or followers on Twitter, that's not what friendship is. That's not a strong way of doing ministry. At the end of the day, it comes down to spending time with people. And I think that's where the impact was made in my life. And you guys asked me to, or Brad did, is like share some YC moments, and I could, but the things that stand out most of all the youth groups that I've been in is the times that I spent with people. And for me, that was something that I had to really work on, because my first inclination when I see 5 people in the corner is not go interrupt and start talking to them. It's just kind of stay in my corner and not, and I discovered very quickly that doesn't work very well when you're a pastor. So you kind of you're forced into that. But I just think back, I mean, in Goose Bay, we would raise money for trips. And I'm sure that the parents in the first 15 years of my ministry thought we were absolutely nuts. I mean, we drove to DC to go to DCLA from Happy Valley Goose Bay, and 2 adults, well, Sam Broomfield, I'll call him an adult, but Sam Broomfield, that meant you probably know, many of you will. Sam drove to Quebec City with me with 2 other youth, Mike Hines and I think Wesley Gould, to pick up a van so that we could drive to. So we drove straight through, stopped in Baie-Comeau to have a bite to eat, slept in the back of the vehicle, and the youth their job was to talk to the driver to keep him from falling asleep. We drove straight to Quebec City, which I think was probably 18, 20 hours drive. Picked up the van, drove back to Goose Bay, left the next Sunday afternoon to drive to Washington to bring these 20 youth to DCLA. And like the things that happened. And then another year we went to Hamilton with Happy Valley Goose Bay. We just so many things, and delivering catalogs to raise money, Sears catalogs. Like it's those times that I think when you look back, those were the strongest ministry opportunities. We had 2 or 3 ministry teams at Elam, a couple children's ministry teams and a youth ministry team that we would do weekend ministry. And it was a time where you did ministry together. And I mean, I'm forever grateful to those years and the times that I reflect upon, where we did crazy things sometimes. And I like sleep a lot more than I did back then. That's when you know you need to start thinking about something else that you go. I've got to confess. Is confession okay at this point right now? Can I confess?
So anytime you got Dean on, you can confess. You know that.
Well, this is not really related to them. This goes back to Elam, and we went to every year we would do our retreat, or a number of years anyway, at Circle Square, and Wallace Tremblett, I think, was probably the director at the time, and he would always give Tammy and I the nurses' room so Tammy and I could stay together, and it was a good arrangement. So we go out there, and Wallace said, "I'm sorry, Dion, you guys are later this year, and we've got no room left for you at all." And so we looked through the room list. The only rooms available were like Josh Parmiter's room and John Collins and all those guys. And they were in grade 8 or something at the time.
Oh,
and I said, "Wallace, I can't stay in a room with them. Like, I will literally have one of them killed before the weekend's over." So he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "I'll put a mattress." He said, "My office and the area we use there," he said, "it's cleaned out." He said, "You can put a mattress on the floor and you can sleep there." Okay, perfect. So I do that. The camp is full, and we didn't have enough room. Everything was packed in. And by the time I get back to Elam for the Sunday night kind of youth emphasis night that we had, story had gotten back that I was sleeping on the floor in Pastor Tremblett's office. Well, they had interpreted that story as what the dedicated youth pastor that we have was willing to sleep on the floor on a mattress all weekend with our youth. And I was thinking, nope, I just didn't want to kill your youth. So, but it really is. It's the relationships, it's the fun, it's the stories, it's all of that.
Yeah. Dean, final thought to you, sir.
I absolve Dion's sin, first of all.
Oh, we haven't started yet.
That was just the first in the list.
It's going to be a long night.
I did get saved that time in Corner Brook at YC, so I think we're okay.
Well, that's an exceptional story.
We had to tell that one.
So one of the speakers made a call.
Oh, you're not gonna tell this, are you?
Sure. One of the speakers made a call for youth leaders who are really, really struggling in the ministry. And I'm not sure was I the culprit, but Dion stood there and said,
Yeah,
never heard. I was the culprit, wasn't I? And Dion said to me, he said, "I never heard what he called for." And how did I answer?
Well, let's back up a little. I was obeying Dean and carrying out some work that Dean wanted. You were just kind of hanging around the stage and not really doing all that much at the time.
I do.
It was Judah Smith who was speaking, and he made a call that I didn't hear. And I looked at Brad and I said, "Did he call youth pastors?" And Brad, with a big smile and nod, "Yeah, he called youth pastors." So, being a good youth pastor, I went forward and I put my hands up in the pose that you're supposed to have, and could sense that there weren't a lot of youth pastors around me, but those that were there were really emotional. So I didn't know what was going on. So I go back, and Tammy and I were in the hotel room, and some of our youth were dropping in, but it was really weird. I'd be talking, and someone would walk in, or they'd be talking in a room. I'd walk in to say goodnight, and everybody stopped talking. That's really weird. And So I get in bed, turn out the lights, and Tammy said, so what's going on? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, like, what's going on? You need to talk to me. I said, I don't know what you. She said, you don't know what I'm talking about? I said, I have no idea. And then, of course, for those who know Tammy, there was a huge amount of laughter going on. She said, you know, when you went forward, yeah, for the youth pastor call. She said, yeah, that part's right. She said, but it was for pastors who are ready to quit ministry and they can't take it anymore, basically. So Paul Grimes was sitting in the stand, and he's talking to people going, I'm a terrible senior pastor. Dion's going through all this stuff, and I have no idea. Dave is there, my brother, and Dave, I think, talked to Brad after, or talked to someone, I think it might have been Brad, and he was just expressing how he's a terrible brother because he's not talking to me, and he has no idea what's going on.
And you're down in front.
Yeah, all the youth, they've got it down to his marriage is in trouble. Like what else could there be? Everything else is going great. So for the next probably 3-4 years after that, Jason would always find a way to get a picture of me somewhere in the YC publicity like this around the front. So,
oh my! And I said to Dean, "Look at Dion up there, confessing all of his sins." Oh,
I had gone because we were trying to do prayer times, and Dean and Stephen and Stephanie were leading the altar times, and there were a bunch of people at the back that our counselors weren't going to at all. So Dean said, "Go down and tell Steve and Stephanie that there's a bunch of people at the back that need some prayer as well." So I was just obeying Dean and doing what he wanted. But anyway.
Well, I'm glad the Lord helped you through that difficult time.
So my question to Tammy was, what am I going to do now? Like, everybody thinks I'm ready to quit. She said, we're going to get on the bus tomorrow. You're going to tell everybody. She said, and then we're going to make so much fun of you for years to come. And that's pretty much exactly what happened.
I've always liked Tammy. Straight and to the point.
Woman of God, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great story. I'm sorry about that, Dion. I've never apologized officially, but now in front of everybody, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
Not really. It was fantastic. Dean, we enjoyed that. We enjoyed it right to the fullest. And they had shots of you on the big screen up there by yourself. I thought, oh, this is the richest thing in the world, man. This is so good.
Anyway, we rudely cut Dean off with that story. I think he was gonna make us all cry now.
No, that story is worth telling because it's one of the best stories that ever emerged out of YC.
Yeah, that was.
We should search the files to see if there's a decision card there from Dion or something because there might be one. I'll never forget it. Oh man. Thanks.
Oh, great. Now Helen Sparks is chiming in here as well, and I'm in trouble with all my former teachers. And...
Oh yeah, and your mother's on. And...
Now you've done it. Oh, what was your question, Brad?
Well, I just want to say I'm glad Dion didn't quit. But
yes,
before we sign off, just wondering if you have any last thoughts on this and what you'd say to the folks who are listening.
Probably nothing new that hasn't already been said, but just, when it comes to following the dreams God lays in your hearts, number one, to understand He's the source of the dreams, not us. Follow Him. So have a good, robust theology and a good walk with God that, walks out that dream in your heart. Understand that dreams come with a price. They sometimes will cost you. Sometimes they'll cost you dearly, but the sacrifice is worth it. And so, the whole piece of, God gives you a dream and everything's going to be great and no issues, no problems is a fantasy world. It comes with a cost. Look at the story of Joseph anytime, and you'll find there were lots of issues. And understand, I think a lot of this theme tonight has been about understanding who you are, that even if you feel inadequate, you're in a perfect position for God to use you. You're actually in a perfect position for God to use you. don't use it as an excuse, but allow him to challenge you to take those steps of faith and watch him grow you into who he wants you to be, and watch him grow the dream into reality from that point on.
That's great. Thank you, my friends. I want to say it was a wonderful pleasure of mine to serve alongside you for those years, and we had a lot of fun watching God do some really, really cool things. The Lord bless you both, and I hope to catch up with you again both soon.
All right. Take
You as
care.
well.
Great being with you. See ya.
Take it easy. Okay, folks, that does it for tonight. Take care of yourselves. Like I said at the top, there will be, I won't be on next week because of Victoria Day. We're going to take the weekend off. So I will see you again, God willing, on the 30th of May. Have a great couple of weeks, and take care of yourselves.